we have a guest lecturer. His name is Stephen Yano. It's this gentleman here. I'll introduce him in a second when he comes down here. You'll notice that he's setting up a camera there. And what he's going to do is he's going to tape the lecture. And the lecture could be tested on. You have a test coming up, like a prelim. And what I have found is people like when you tape the lecture and you put it on Canvas for them to look at again, double check things, maybe refresh their memories. And what Steve and I have been friends for a long time, and I usually get him to come here. He actually lives on Long Island, but he teaches at a university called St. John's University. I don't know if you've heard, they're famous for their basketball team. And they're also famous for, Steve is a professor there. And he teaches rhetoric, and he's going to give us an overview of the entire field of rhetoric. He has his Ph.D. in rhetoric from the University of Pittsburgh, and he is interested in all kinds of interesting things. I'll let him tell more about that. I first met Steve when you were in your early 20s.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Early 20s.
That's right.
And I was teaching at the University of Rochester. I was the director of the debate program there, and I needed an assistant. And Steve had recently graduated from Texas A&M, which stands for Agriculture and Mechanics. But he went there, and he willingly took the job at the University of Rochester and worked with me for a couple years.
Yeah, like 3 years.
Yeah, like 3 years. And then he went, well, he worked at the University of Rochester, but I was a supervisor. And then he ended up going to graduate school at Syracuse University, got his master's there, and then eventually got his PhD. And now he has worked at the St. John's University for how long?
17 years.
17 years. So he's older than you are. Or he's worked there longer than you are.
Let's not accelerate that.
Yeah, but anyway, when you were like 5 or 4, he was beginning his teaching career. So he's old, not as old as me, because remember, I hired him. But he is incredibly interesting. And I'm not going to steal his thunder, but every year when the students evaluate this course, many of them always point out that this is their favorite lecture. Because what he's going to do is give you a survey of the field of rhetoric from ancient times to present day. And it will help you understand what rhetoric is, but it will also help you understand how you should attack your paper, which is, again, remember, worth 50% of your grade. So, without further ado, let's hear it for Stephen Yano, who took a bus, the Cornell campus-to-campus bus from the Cornell Club, and arrived today just a few hours ago. I then wined and dined him, emphasis on the wine, at the Statler, and we just waddled over here after we ate, and now he's going to lecture. Let's hear it for Stephen.
All right, thanks, Sam. Hi, everybody. Oh, hello. Come right on in. Tonight, we're going to go pretty fast. There's a lot to cover, a lot of different things to look at. But I'm always happy if you want to ask a question or make a comment. I'm always happy to be interrupted. So put your hand up at any point and we'll clarify things. I want to start by getting you to think. Yeah, what's your question?
Do you mind being interrupted?
No?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll start tonight with a question, which is this word rhetoric. You've probably heard it before. What do you think it means? How would you define it? How would you understand it? What's the definition you give to it? Think about that for like a minute, and then we'll kind of go around and people can share what they think.
And if you could share it out loud, not just think it, but like speak out. What does the word rhetoric mean?
Does anybody have a definition they want to share? Maybe you're looking it up still.
If someone could please break the awkward silence, that would be great.
Yeah.
Speech.
Speech. Very good. That's a great, very basic definition.
Language.
Language. A little broader. I mean, is speech broader than language, or language broader than speech? I don't know. Yeah.
Trying to convince someone of something.
Yeah, trying to convince someone of something. Anybody else? Oh yeah. The way something is presented. Okay. So in a non-persuasive way or non-convincing way? Maybe, or does it matter? Okay, nature of the way information is presented. Very nice. Anybody else? Yeah.
Word choice?
Word choice. Yeah, very good. All of these, nobody's wrong. All of these are correct. It just depends on where and when you are, which of the understandings or which of the definitions really is the one that's getting attention, or getting total attention. But all of these are correct. Tonight, we're going to look at 3 different definitions that happen over thousands of years of time. So I'll go kind of quick and kind of orient you to these things, but everybody's basically correct. So there's 3 cases we're going to look at tonight. The first is rhetoric as oratory, the art of speech, and it's going to involve this person who will be revealed to you in a few minutes. And then as time moves along, thousands of years later, it becomes an art of interpretation, which is the way it's mostly practiced today at universities, is this idea of rhetoric as interpretation. And this person, who I will introduce in the second part of the lecture, is fundamental to that change. And he's somebody who is directly connected to each and every one of you here tonight. And then finally is the most modern, the most contemporary, which is the study of meaning making. So these are the 3 different ways that we're going to look at rhetoric tonight. And I think everybody's understanding or everybody's definition touched on at least one of these. But first, we're going to go all the way back, thousands of years ago, to ancient Greece and ancient Athens, which is not the only place where rhetoric was happening in the world, but it's the place where rhetoric, the way it's studied in American universities, always draws its history from. And that's not because it's the best definition or the only place it's being done. It's being done in ancient China, it's being done in ancient India, it's being done in ancient Africa, it's being done all over the world. But the word rhetoric is a Greek word, a Greek cognate. And like you said, speech, the ancient Greek word rhetoros means a speaker or an orator, which is where the word rhetoric comes from. So ancient Greece, particularly ancient Athens, is where most academic understandings of rhetoric come from, for better or for worse. But if you meet a rhetorician, they're probably getting their theory from that, by historical accident. There's other traditions you can study. Here's the first definition of rhetoric that we're going to look at tonight. The art of identifying all available means of persuasion in a given instance. And this definition comes to us late in Greek democracy from this person here. If you haven't guessed already, it's Aristotle. Aristotle is like one of the most famous thinkers across the board. He touched everything. And it's probably because a lot of his writings survived. But he's just known as making like lots and lots of different documents, different writings about all kinds of different things. He wrote all these books, but he didn't really have to have creative titles because they were like the first books. It's like On Plants, his book about plants. On Breathing, about breathing. On Dreams. On Animals. It's like not very, and then On Rhetoric, which is the book he wrote that we're going to talk about here tonight.
How many people here, sorry to interrupt, how many people here have heard of Aristotle?
Yeah,
Excellent.
Yeah, Aristotle writes strangely for us. He writes these lists. It's almost like clickbait, like internet clickbait. It'll be like animals, 7 different kinds. Number 6 will really shock you. Click here. Well, he doesn't have the clicking ability. But this is the way all of his stuff, if you ever read it, it reads very strangely because it's not the way that we prefer to get information. But he, a lot of people think he was making lecture notes on lots of different things. Because he was teaching at a school where his teacher worked, the person who taught him. So let's get into this definition, where it comes from, what its origin is. Aristotle was the inheritor of a big disagreement in the ancient world between the sophists who were represented by this person Gorgias. How many of you have heard of Gorgias? You have? How did you hear about Gorgias?
In the that conversation where I think it was Plato was having with Gorgias and the other 2 guys.
Yeah.
They were all arguing about stuff.
This is like a philosophy class, or
I
you just
guess.
pick it up?
Ethics.
Oh, okay, ethics, right. Okay, very good, yeah. So Gorgias is known to us through Plato's writing about him. And Plato was a student of the person who's against Gorgias, Socrates. And Plato, everything we know about Socrates comes from Plato. Socrates didn't write anything. Socrates didn't like writing. He thought writing, as Plato has him say, writing destroys your memory. And the worst thing about writing things down is that it might get into the hands of somebody who doesn't deserve to read your writing. And they might attribute to you all kinds of terrible ideas and thoughts that are not yours. And you won't be there to correct them or to defend yourself. So don't write anything down. Isn't that weird? That's one of the things that Plato wrote in a weird dialogue of Phaedrus. Maybe you read Phaedrus too, I don't know. But Plato hated Gorgias and the Sophists so much that every single one of his books is against one of the Sophists and their teaching. Imagine holding that kind of a grudge. Imagine hating people that much to where everything you wrote and everything you're known for is taking these people down. Well, who were the Sophists and why did Plato hate them so much? The Sophists were the classical practitioners of rhetoric. Gorgias was someone, so here's the things to know about the Sophists, who were the first practitioners of rhetoric. They were not Greek. Most of them came from other places. They were definitely not Athenian. Some of them were Greek, maybe, but from faraway places like Macedonia. Most of them were Italian or from other places. They spoke Greek, and they made a lot of money in Athens, teaching people how to speak well. Because ancient Athens was a democracy. It wasn't a democracy like the one that we're, enjoying for now. I don't know how much longer we're going to have that going forward, but we're enjoying it for now. But their democracy was very different. It didn't involve any women or any foreigners. There's no amount of time you could live in Athens where you could get the right to vote. If you were an Athenian-born man who had a lineage you could trace and you owned property, you could participate in voting and debating on policy. And the Sophists were consultants who were brought in and would teach you how to speak well. They'd even write your speech for you, show you how to memorize it, show you how to stand, how to speak, how to gesture for maximum persuasive effect. And that's what they would do. They make a lot of money doing this. But also the other place where they made their money was in Athens. You had no lawyers, but you had a court system and you had crimes. So if you were accused of a crime, you had to go to court and defend yourself. You had to give all of the speeches yourself. And the Sophists would take money to teach you how to write your defense. And a lot of these survive. You can go and read them. They've been translated. You can go and read them, and they give you a little sense of what's persuasive to average Athenian citizens, because they had a jury system. It's like 201, it goes up to 501 as the population increases over time. And they would all listen, and then they would vote whether you're guilty or innocent. But it was all done publicly. So speech was at a real premium. Gorgias is one of the most famous of the Sophists, most famous for his ideas on rhetoric. He was known as a great teacher, but he was also known as a great performer. He had people who were studying with him, but he was also known as somebody who would write and read poetry or perform famous poems or famous plays. And his performances would sell out very quickly. He apparently had a really nice accent when he spoke ancient Attic Greek. He's an Italian guy, so he sounded really nice. But one of the things Plato and Socrates didn't like about it is these rhythmic performances, where they would read a poem and read it rhythmically, and the crowd would kind of move along with it. Sort of like contemporary hip-hop performance, with a lot less electronic music, because they don't have electricity. Very rhythmic performance, where they're reciting poems everybody knows, and they're putting their own kind of take on it, and the whole crowd is getting into it. And this is what it would be like to go to one of Gorgias' shows. And they hated this. Plato and Socrates hated this because they thought it was short-circuiting your ability to think, and you're just moving along with the words and not really paying attention to what arguments are being made or what the words are saying. They hated that. And this is a critique we hear in contemporary hip-hop as well, that maybe some of the lyrics are not the best ethically or attitudinally. It's the same kind of critique that they have of this. But Gorgias would also teach people how to be convincing no matter what they knew. And in the dialogue Gorgias, there's several moments of this that are kind of disturbing, where Plato has Socrates ask Gorgias, what if someone came to you and they didn't know right from wrong? They didn't know what was good. They didn't know good from bad. And Gorgias is like, nobody would come to me like that. Like, what are you talking about? Everybody has a sense of this. So, well, what if they did? And he's like, well, I guess I would have to teach them what's good and bad too, which wouldn't be a problem. And he's like, Socrates is like, okay, that's kind of weird. And he said, well, what if one of your students applied to be Athens' doctor, the doctor that all the tax money goes to pay? And an actual doctor, somebody trained by Hippocrates, for example, the best doctor in ancient Athens. Who would get the job? And Gorgias is like, well, my student would get the job. Like, even though he doesn't know anything about medicine? He'd be like, yeah. Because he could persuade them that he knows things about medicine. That's what it all comes down to. Your ability to communicate and to let people know that you're the right person for the job. And Socrates thought this was terrible as well. And Plato did too. So let's look at Gorgias' definition of rhetoric. Actually, before you get to that, one of the most famous moments Gorgias had, and this is one of the few things that survive. A lot of the sophists' writings don't survive. We have all of Plato's stuff, multiple copies of it, because a lot of people thought that wasn't very popular, so they thought they should save it. Think the accident of history. If you guys have taken a history class or maybe studied history, one of the problems of history is if something is really popular and everybody has a copy of it, it doesn't ever get saved. And future historians are like, oh, I wish we had a copy of that book. This would be like Harry Potter or something. Everybody has one, so no one's going to put it in a safe place. And it's going to get lost. And then future historians 2,000 years from now will be like, was Harry Potter a real person or a fictional character? They'll have like academic conferences about this. Somebody will write their dissertation about it. It'll be great. And this is like what it is to work in the ancient world. There's all kinds of things the sophists wrote. Nobody preserved them. Why? Because they were super popular. But everybody preserved all Plato's stuff, which meant it was a minority viewpoint. They were afraid it was going to get lost. So they made copies and copies and copies and stored it everywhere. One of Gorgias' works that we only know through people quoting it is he came out after one of his big shows and he's like, my new mixtape is dropping on Tuesday. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be a real banger. It's called Encomium to Helen. It's my next big performance, original speech. Now you guys know who Helen was? Greek mythology fans? Christopher Nolan's going to make this Odyssey movie, so everybody's going to know pretty soon, right? Are you guys excited about that?
Yeah.
I'm pretty excited about it too. I'm kind of a nerd for this stuff. We'll see what they do. But Helen, nobody knows who Helen was?
You never heard of Helen of Troy?
Helen of Troy, yeah. Yeah, you know who Helen of Troy is? From the Brad Pitt movie or from reading it?
No, from reading.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so who is Helen?
She was, I know through like the story of the Trojan horse and
Yeah, the Trojan horse story. That's part is definitely related to her.
yeah.
Yeah, if you ever read the Iliad or you know the story of the war on Troy. Yeah, so Helen is supposedly the most beautiful woman ever. Ever. People wrote all these poems about her. There's no picture of her or anything. But she's apparently super gorgeous. And the way that Homer writes the Iliad is kind of the way Donald Trump talks. You know, Donald Trump makes up little nicknames for everybody? Like Sleepy Joe, Lion Ted, Low Energy Jeb, Little Marco. I guess he doesn't use Little Marco anymore because they're friends now. But he makes up little names for everybody, right? I don't know what some of the recent ones are. But this is the way the Iliad reads. It's like swift-footed Achilles, noble Hector, noble, wise Priam. Everybody's got a little nickname. Beautiful, beautiful Helen. So Helen is married to a guy named Menelaus, whose brother is Agamemnon, the most powerful king in Greece. So Greece, Athens is often conflated as Greece, but there are all these little city-states that all have their own form of government, and they only cooperate when there's something in it for them. They're not like a whole country. Pan-Hellenism is a new idea, kind of nearing the end of Plato's life. They're all kind of independent countries. They help each other out. They have the same religion, same language, very different ideas about how government should be, very different ideas about what they should do with their military, if they should have one, all these kind of things. The biggest difference, of course, between Athens and Sparta. So Helen is blamed for the worst war in Greek history, the Trojan War, because she was married to a Greek king, and she was seduced by Paris, by beautiful Paris, good-looking Paris, a Trojan prince, who seduced her away to Troy. And Menelaus is like, that's my wife. And Agamemnon is like, my brother's upset. Get the army together. And so everyone goes. And they have Achilles, who's a demigod. It's kind of cool to have a demigod on your side. Achilles cannot be killed. He only has one weakness, his heel, right? His
Has
Achilles
anybody
heel.
ever heard this phrase, Achilles heel? It just means like they have this one thing that makes them very vulnerable. It's often used in the English language and people don't even know the story of Achilles. But do you know why his heel is his one weakness.
It's where his mother dropped him in the river Styx.
Yeah,
or where
she held him
him.
by his heel and she dropped him in to make him immortal. But he had this, where she was holding his heel, that part didn't get dipped.
Yeah, so comes back on him. I don't want to spoil the story for you. It's only, 3,000 years old. I don't want. You still need some time to go check it out. But they go to war. The war lasts 14 years. Now, an encomium is something you probably don't know what that is. Has anybody heard that word before? An encomium is a eulogy, but it's a speech of incredibly high praise. It's a kind of a speech discourse we don't really have. We have versions of it for someone who's been a great servant to the state or a great American hero, somebody who we'll miss, but the entire country, everyone's going to miss for time immemorial. So this sounds very weird to Athenians, because Helen is considered to be the worst of all possible women. Right? She fell for her desire for Paris. She went off and then she killed all these great Greek men because of the stupid war. It's all her fault. Like, nobody's naming their daughter Helen. It's not a good name in ancient Athens. No one's doing that. But to give an encomium to her, very weird. So Gorgias is like, I'm going to give a speech of great praise. And you can go read it. I'm not going to recite it to you or anything like that. But it survives because everybody thought it was so good. Because he goes down the reasons why it's not her fault or why she shouldn't be blamed. As an aside, the ancient Greek word they used for seduce is this word plegiro, which has a lot of different meanings. But we get the English word plagiarize from this word. You've all read the Riot Act about plagiarism your whole time here at Cornell. And think about plagiarism. Plagiro is this word that either means to kidnap or to seduce. And the meaning is unclear unless you kind of go and make an argument of the context. So Paris plagiros Helen. So did he kidnap her? I mean, women don't have pretty much any rights in this period of history. Or did he seduce her? Or maybe there's not much of a difference in terms of the ancient Greek world. It's interesting, this is something classicists debate. It's kind of an interesting aside. So at the end of this speech, everybody's like, wow, Helen was not so bad. And Gorgias is like, I gave that speech just to see if I could do it. I don't believe anything I said. I just wanted to see if I could get you to believe it. People are like, you did. And he's like, this is the art that I teach. This is the art of rhetoric. And then he made this statement. This is from the encomium to Helen. And this is what he says, that he teaches speech, or the word rhetoric, is a powerful lord who with the most smallest and most invisible body accomplishes most godlike works. It can banish fear, remove grief, instill pleasure, and enhance pity. It can do all of these things. It's this incredibly powerful thing. He wants people to admire the art of rhetoric. That's why he gave the encomium to Helen.
Imagine you're so cocky that you're like, I'm going to give this speech, and everybody goes, that's an amazing speech, you're right, Helen wasn't bad. And then you're like, I was just fooling with you. I actually think she's terrible. But I just want to show you how persuasive and amazing I am at the field of rhetoric.
And he's like, I don't really have an opinion on Helen. They're like, you just gave us this long opinion on Helen that was awesome. He's like, because I could. Because I have that power to make you believe things. That's what the art of rhetoric is. And when he said that rhetoric is an art, he called it a pharmakon. This is the ancient Greek word he uses. This is his definition of rhetoric. Right? Very, very different than Plato's and Socrates, which is, it should be banned, it's evil. But it's kind of related too. Pharmakon, we get the English word pharmacy from. So this is the ancient Greek word for drug or medicine. Again, like kidnap, seduce, there's not a lot of difference here. It's kind of difficult to know what the clear translation is. But that's what he called rhetoric. Plato and Socrates wanted rhetoric banned. They thought it interfered with good governance. Government should be run by people who are actually wise, who actually know things. Those people who are the philosopher kings. Plato wrote extensively about this. The sophists were just taking advantage of democracy and making money. The sophists said the only way we know things is through speaking with each other and through persuading each other. It doesn't really matter what's actually out there, the sophists would argue, unless you can convince someone that it's actually out there. So you have to practice the art of rhetoric, the pharmakon. And that's what Gorgias' understanding of it is. Yeah?
Sometimes in my advocacy and debate class, or in this class, I'll ask, like on the first day, I'll ask people, if you could have any power, any superpower, what would you have? What would you take? And someone always picks invisibility, and then someone else always picks speed, and someone says strength, and someone's the ability to fly, and I'm like, those are all stupid powers. And then you're like, why are they stupid? Because I would have the power of rhetoric. I would be rhetoric man. And rhetoric man can persuade all those people to do whatever they want, whatever that rhetoric person wants them to do. The power of rhetoric surpasses all superpowers, because those people are now become my servants.
Yeah. This is kind of what Gorgias is saying, in a way. But there are other sophists too. You can go read all of Plato's dialogues, and each one is about a sophist and why they're wrong. But when you look at it and you think about it, you're like, which way has the world kind of gone? So Socrates is killed by the Athenian government for, he's executed for corrupting the youth, because he told them the gods were not real, they were constructions made for social control. He got in trouble once for it before, because he would always say, by Zeus, about everything. They're like, you really shouldn't take Zeus's name in vain. It's kind of like saying Jesus Christ or something. People might get mad about that. But in ancient Athens, they're like, no, Zeus might actually come here and kill us. Like, they really believed the gods could like come down from Olympus and walk around. And Zeus is like known as the hurler of thunderbolts. That's his little Donald Trump name. He throws lightning bolts when he's angry. So you don't want Zeus coming around. So people are like, Socrates, stop. And he's like, it doesn't really matter. He's like, listen, I'm going to swear on gods you don't believe in. And then we'll see if you get upset. So sometimes you read these Platonic dialogues and Socrates says, by the dog. What's he talking about, by the dog? He's swearing on the Egyptian god Anubis, just to prove the point that they don't care if it's a god that they don't believe in. So they were well aware of Egyptian pantheon. They knew of the Egyptians well at this point. A foreign country they deal with quite regularly. So you'd be like, by the dog, you're right. And people get angry because they know that he really means by Zeus, but he's just saying Anubis to get, or by the dog. He didn't even use his real name, which to be even more insulting, to show that nobody would care. So along comes Aristotle, who's Plato's student. And Aristotle kind of grows up in this world of the sophists versus the Socratics. And he has a lot of sympathy for his teacher Plato, but he also sees a lot of good in what the sophists had to answer. So he's seen traditionally as the person who kind of brings them both together and says rhetoric is for times when you don't have a lot of time and you need to convince a large amount of people that we should take action based on we think this is going to happen in the future, we're not sure. And that's kind of where he gets his idea of rhetoric from, as opposed to the sophists who are like, rhetoric is the art you use all the time, or the Socratics who would say, you need a lot of time to ask a lot of questions to really get to the truth of the matter. The Socratic method, as we all know. If you're going to law school, you'll experience the Socratic method as a pedagogical tool, which is just questioning, until you either contradict yourself or you can't follow yourself. And then it proves that you need to know more. And that's what Socrates would do to everybody, even if they were having a busy day. Run around without shoes on. Why are you buying that? I need it for my family. But what does a family need? Go away, Socrates. I have to get home. Right, this is kind of like, I think they murdered him because he was annoying. But
I actually have a nice painting of it. I'll try to get it in my office, in one of my offices on the 5th floor, of Socrates and his students all around him, and he's talking to them, and he's drinking a cup of something. Do you know what he's drinking? Anybody know what he's drinking? Looks like wine, but it's not wine. Yeah.
Nitrate, poison,
Hemlock.
hemlock.
Poisonous hemlock, because they said, you have to kill yourself. And he goes, let me choose the way, drink poison. And so he's lecturing at the last minute. And remember the charge, corrupting the youth, making them think for themselves, making them question things that are considered what everybody should believe, religion, government, your leaders. He's teaching you to question it. Someone gave me this painting because they're like, you corrupt more youth than anybody I know at Cornell. And I'm like, thank you very much, right? I was very proud of this, and I put this big painting in my office. So every day I go in there and I'm like, did I corrupt any youth today? And I go, I hope so. I hope I'm corrupting youth right now. You're the youth, right? And you're starting to re-examine your most cherished beliefs, right? Maybe Socrates was right. He was so dangerous they had to kill him. That tells you something. Maybe Cornell, if I end up dead.
does Cornell have the death penalty?
You know that it wasn't an accident. You heard it here first.
Wow. They might come get you.
Cornell,
That's what you're saying.
I've already been warned, you're corrupting the youth.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Socrates' students did try to break him out of jail before the death penalty. He's like, no, I'm staying. They're like, no, we can get you out of here. And he's like, if I enjoyed the laws of Athens when they were on my side, it doesn't really seem very cool to suddenly be like, the laws of Athens are trash, when they're not on my side. Yeah.
Well, isn't he given the option of exile, and he elects to stay and die?
I think that they sentenced him to death. If you read the apology, you know, he kind of makes fun of the entire system. He makes fun of the entire justice system of Athens. He knows the speech that he's supposed to give, and he needles them, makes little turns in it, kind of insults them in ways that they're like, wait a second, he sounds like he's praising us, but not. So he's actually kind of a consummate rhetorician in and of himself. But I don't know if he was actually asked to be
I
exiled.
have heard that as well, and I know it's debated. Remember, this is stuff from thousands of years ago, so different translations and different stories kind of arise and take on a life of their own. But I don't think that is necessarily proven, you know, among scholars. I think it's a nice little twist to the story. And they said he could be lived, and he's like, hell no, take your damn laws and stuff.
The way Plato tells it is a bunch of them came to bust him out of jail, and he was like, I'm going to stay.
But I like your twist. It'd be good for the movie.
I mean, yeah,
Starring Tom
but
Cruise.
yeah, I don't know very much about historical Socrates, but I know about Plato's Socrates.
Yeah.
It might be the case. So this is the definition Aristotle comes up with in his on rhetoric. And a couple of things that are kind of interesting about it is it doesn't really say that it's about persuading people or convincing people or changing people's minds. What it says is it's about identifying the ways you could do that. So it's about taking inventory, identifying all the available means of persuasion. And also it's situational. In a given instance, for Aristotle, there aren't silver bullet, universal, objective modes of persuasion. There aren't things that are always going to work. In every situation, in every instance, there are modes of persuasion or rhetorical things you could do that may not work in another situation. You have to take inventory. And then you have to know. So the art of rhetoric is not how many people's minds did you change, but how good are you at inventorying what's available for you to use in a given situation where rhetoric is necessary to use or useful to use. So this governs rhetoric for thousands of years, is Aristotle's ideas about it. And then they're lost, and then they come back. So this first understanding of rhetoric is that it's a productive art. It's about teaching people how to make speeches, teaching people how to say things, how to use it. And it's a creative thing. It's not about responding or picking from a list of pre-done things. It's about making something up that you think will work for the people that you're talking to. This gets divided up into 5 different things you'd study. So in the earliest universities, we're moving ahead pretty quickly here. We haven't even gotten to Rome yet, but in the earliest universities, rhetoric kind of rules the show. It's kind of treated the way hard science is treated at the modern university, where the sciences get all the money, all the attention. That's what you see in college football game weekend, is you see the ad for the university. It's always a bunch of young people in coats with vials, you know. Like, this is the way the university is portrayed, as this place of hard science. The ancient university is a place of rhetoric, where you would learn all the different ways you can communicate with other people, get your ideas across, change their mind, or get them to see things your way. So these are what they're called the 5 canons of rhetoric. Invention is, how do I come up with what to say? Arrangement is, what order should I put my ideas in? Style is, what language should I use? And not like French or English, but should I use, really, I'm from Texas, so we have this, we would say, highfalutin language. Like a lot of SAT words, a lot of GRE words. Would you use like really complicated language, or language that makes you sound intellectual? Or would you use very base language, use a lot of slang, use a lot of constructions that would be considered appropriate? For rhetoric, a lot of times speaking incorrectly, using incorrect grammar, is one of the best things you can do, because it connects the audience to you. It's kind of an interesting, like using things like ain't, or eliding, as linguists call eliding. Like I'm going to, I'm gonna. That's an illusion.
Sometimes this is called code switching. You know,
Yeah.
like Hillary Clinton was always made fun of because when she was campaigning in like Arkansas or something, she all of a sudden laid it on thick.
Yeah, accents are good for this. So there's not really an appropriate way to speak unless, and there are inappropriate ways to do it. If you're speaking in a way where the audience is not going to connect with you, then that's a bad way to do it. Delivery is, how do you use your voice, the physicality of your voice, Your body, your gestures, how do you use the space? All of these kind of things are what delivery is. How fast do you go? It's the physical parts of rhetoric. And memory is how do I remember everything that I'm going to say. Now this one doesn't really matter so much anymore because you see people regularly. You know, I have like PowerPoint, I can look here. I could have notes, I could have all this stuff. We have cheap paper, you could write everything down you want to say and look at it as many times as you want. You have your phone. I see people use their phone as a reference when they're giving a presentation. In the ancient world, writing things down is very expensive. And it's not great, like for the Romans, for example, they have these wax tablets. They're kind of like Etch-a-Sketch. They have like a little rim around them. And they have paraffin wax or whatever, and you take a hot, kind of a hot pen, it's like a nail kind of, and you can write in it. It's very temporary, and then when you're done with it, you can put it over the candle and it melts back down and you can use it again. And that's kind of like disposable writing for them. So actual writing is very expensive. So they developed all these crazy techniques of memory to memorize hours and hours and hours of speeches. Like they would give a 3-hour speech, they have it perfectly memorized, exactly what they want to say, how they want to move, and then days later they could do it again. So they had memory techniques that we don't have.
Or need, we have teleprompters.
Yeah, we don't really need them anymore. And we could write stuff down willy-nilly, and like we could write a grocery list and throw it away. Like we don't even think about the cost of that. Or we lose a pen, we don't think about the cost of that. But cheap writing, or writing where we don't think about how expensive it is a very, very, very modern convenience. So let's go through a very, very, very long period of history very quickly. This is like thousands of years, very, very fast, to get up to where we need to be for the next chapter. So we'll talk about some of these figures and their different definitions of rhetoric. So Cicero was a Roman. Does anybody know anything about Cicero? You guys seem to know a lot. Yeah.
Go ahead.
He was a senator around the time of Caesar. He was like really well renowned, like probably one of the most popular governmental figures in all of history, like super duper influential in a lot of different schools of thought, I guess.
Yeah, he wrote a lot. He was a lawyer. He ran Rome for a long time. And like any politician, career politician, he was up and down in popularity. So like he got exiled for a little while, came back. He went up and down. He was consul for a while. He led military campaigns. He did a lot of different stuff. And he was good friends with Julius Caesar. He was friends with him. He thought Julius Caesar was a great rhetorician. And it was because of that style difference. He would say, you know, Caesar could go into the Senate and speak in a way to where they all felt admired and they felt like they were hearing really beautiful words. But then he could go back to his army and he could tell the best nasty jokes about the enemy commander's mom that you've ever heard. Everybody would be laughing. Like he could do it all. And Cicero really admired that.
Has anyone ever heard of the town of Cicero, New York? Yeah, it's near Syracuse. It's like if you drive to Syracuse Airport, you drive right through it, right? Or it's basically a suburb of Syracuse. And there's also a town called Tully, T-U-L-L-Y. Has anybody ever heard of that town? It's also by Syracuse. What is the connection, Stephen?
Oh, okay. So Cicero is very influential on our founding fathers. So if you go back and read their letters to each other, when they're founding the Republic, they're talking about the Constitution, they're trying to figure out what kind of government we should have. They're always saying, well, you know, we want a republic the way Tully would want it to be. And you're like, who's Tully? Who's Tully? It's Marcus Turellius Cicero. They refer to him as Tully in their letters and papers. It's very strange. I don't know why that is. But they're all reading him and translating. They're all good, like, Latin students. So.
Yeah, they were all kind of ancient Rome fanboys.
Yeah.
Like, and they wrote under the different pen names. It's like, you know, Publius and
Publius, yeah, for the Federalist
stuff like
Papers.
that. Yeah.
And then George Washington would sign his letters Cincinnatus.
And there's a town around.
Do you guys know Cincinnatus? Why he would do that? You probably know about Cincinnatus.
Like a tiny bit.
Huh?
Not like a tiny bit.
Why
a
would
tiny
it
bit.
be called? Why would
You know
it be
about
called
Cincinnatus?
Cincinnatus surrendered pretty much all of his power, much like George Washington eventually did. So he was hailed as this like example of a restrained leader.
Yeah. So Alexander Hamilton, who everybody knows now because of his stellar hip-hop career, what a great second act. Or third act, I guess, maybe. But Alexander Hamilton wanted the president to serve for life. It was a lifetime appointment. And Washington was like, no, I don't think that's the right way to go. And the example of Cincinnatus was that when there was war, big war from Carthage on Rome, they had these emergency powers where they would pick somebody to become the military dictator. So things didn't have to be debated in the Senate, they didn't have to be voted on. he could just go and do what he needed to do. And Cincinnatus was the guy they picked. He was a war veteran, very well admired. He was a farmer. He was like, okay, I'll do it. And so they give him these dictatorial powers. They dissolve the Constitution, all this stuff. He's in charge of Rome. He's like the emperor. And he goes to war and wins the war. And then they're like, what now, Cincinnatus? And he's like, by my imperial authority, I will create a senate. And by my imperial authority, I create the 12 tables of law. And he just brought the whole republic back. And then he was like, and by my imperial authority, I make the senate more powerful than me. I dissolve the emperor thing. And so he didn't have to. He got rid of it all. And Washington saw that as noble and the right way to go. And so he decided to do that too, much to Hamilton's chagrin. He didn't like that at all.
Two quick things on that. So there's also a town not very far around here named Cincinnatus, not very far from here. And Ithaca is a Greek name too, right? And there's a town named Romulus, and Syracuse is a Greek name. What are all these, Central New York has all these like ancient Roman and Greek names? Anybody know? I'll tell the story. So in the Albany, in the map office in the early 1800s, there was a classic scholar. And people had to send in what they wanted their town called. And they'd be like, what they used to call Ithaca before they called it Ithaca, they called it Sodom. Why would they call a town Sodom? Does anybody know from the Bible what Sodom and Gomorrah was? That was the sin city. Ithaca was a wicked place, right? And they just called it Sodom. That's where you go if you want to do all kind of sinning. And so they're like, we want to be called Sodom, right? That's what everybody knows is that. And then the map guy was like, no, I'm calling you Ithaca, right? And then another place would be like, we want to be called Skunk Hollow. And he was like, no, we're not having any town in New York State named Skunk Hollow. We're calling you Rome, right? And there's a Rome, New York, right? And then, so he just made up all these names to kind of class the place up. And then like 100 years later, there was this huge wave of immigrants from Italy in New York City. You probably heard about it, right? All these Italians, like early 1900s. And they looked at a map and they were like, holy shit, our people, they're up here. Those are all Italian names, and a bunch of Greek people saw them too. They're like, our people live up there. Let's go join them. And they got up here and they're like, none of our people are here. Why are these places? And they're like, one dude in the office, classic scholar. But that was why a lot of Greek and Italian immigrants came to New York. So if you go to, for example, Rome, New York, tons of Italian and Greek immigrants, and everywhere else where there's this. But some of the names are kind of funny, right? Like they even named a place totally after the nickname of Cicero. But that was sort of interesting. One other story, because I really love this story that Steve is telling about George Washington, which is kind of interesting. He didn't want to be like a king, right? He just got rid of a king. So they were trying to think, what should we call the leader, right? And a couple of people suggested king. So let's just call him King Washington. They're like, we just got rid of King George. We don't need a King Washington. So they're like, well, what word should we use? And we're like, well, what does the leader do? Well, they preside over the Senate, right, and the Congress, right, the House of Representatives. But they're not a ruler. They just preside over it. They have very little power. So preside is where they got the word president. And the first president, the first use of the word president was in the U.S. American Constitution, right? And then a bunch of other countries like, well, let's have presidents too, right? Like, let's follow that. It's kind of cool how that word developed, right?
Yeah, so Cicero's contribution to rhetoric, many contributions to rhetoric. He wrote a lot, he did a lot, he really shaped it. His idea of rhetoric is one that's very strange. Rhetoric is where you go to learn about pretty much any other art or any other subject. You go to rhetoric to create things that you would say about philosophy or history or law or anything like that. He kind of had it in a different way than we think about it today, whereas you go and learn the stuff, you learn the material, and then you put your presentation together. He kind of had it the other way around. You go to rhetoric to find out what things you can possibly say and how those would connect to the audience and the things that you want them to understand. And this gets flipped as we move into medieval times to where philosophy becomes the place where all knowledge is created, and rhetoric becomes how you present that knowledge. Cicero had a very different understanding of that. Quintilian, who's pictured here, this is a great picture of Quintilian here, with this hat. I don't know where this comes from, but he was a Roman too, but he's looking a little like, kind of ragged there. But I really like this picture. I don't know where I got it from. I think it's very funny. But he was a Roman at the end of the Roman Empire, near the end. where the Roman emperor said, you know, we got to make Rome better. Rome's falling apart. Things are not great. We got to go back to those Republican days of Cicero, back in the Republic, back when people gave great speeches and they knew things. Right now, everybody's just kind of trash. So I'm going to give big grants to people if they can figure out ways we can bring back the eloquence of hundreds of years ago. And Quintilian got one of these grants, like a good academic. He filled it out, got a big grant, and he wrote a really long book about how to train your son to be a Roman senator. Everything they need to know. And it's a giant, long work on rhetoric. How do you teach them how to stand, to walk, to position themselves? One of the interesting things about Quintilian is he wasn't Italian, he wasn't a Latin, he was from Spain. So as an immigrant, he saw rhetoric as this real magical kind of way into being accepted by a foreign culture, living as an immigrant in a culture that's not his own. He could speak Latin and all that stuff, but he saw it as really kind of, and a lot of people in Quintilian's time and a little bit after it in the Roman Empire saw rhetoric as a way to get in, to find jobs, to find work, and to live in a place where they felt a lot more secure than wherever they were living before. But Quintilian said that rhetoric is sort of the art of how to become political. How do we become political? How do I communicate that? How do you get that across to people? And then as we move into Christianity, here's St. Augustine looking very, very attractive. I don't know where I got this picture from too, but I think it's hilarious. Look like a movie star or something. St. Augustine, one of the early church fathers, he was also like Quintilian. He taught rhetoric in Rome. He quit that job. He wrote about it. He wrote about how horrible it was to be a university teacher and how the students never pay attention and they don't care and they're like doing other stuff and daydreaming. He was like, this is not the job for me. And then he converted to Christianity, and one of the things he said was, in the early church, that you can't just toss away all the pagan ideas. Some of them might be quite useful for the church. And one of them was rhetoric. Since he understood it, he taught it, he was educated in it, he tried to bring that into Christian proselytizing early on. His definition of rhetoric was that rhetoric has three functions: to teach, to please, and to move. Which are all very kind of interesting way to think about rhetoric. It just has these three essential functions. That's what he wrote about. Teach people things, make people happy, or it can move people. It can inspire them to action. And that was what he wrote about. So that definition, a little bit different than Quintilian, who's like, well, it's the art of the political, or Cicero, where it's like, this is the engine that makes knowledge possible, or how we would get knowing things to one another. Then last is Francis Bacon, who was early modernist. And Francis Bacon was famous for lots of different things. He was a big writer, and there was a long controversy where people thought he was really Shakespeare. I don't know if you ever read anything like that. Shakespeare didn't exist, and Francis Bacon wrote everything, or he was in a group of people who wrote stuff. He comes up all the time. But he had he was interested, like a lot of early modernists, in how people's minds worked, trying to move more into the scientific realm. But he said that rhetoric is the art of applying reason to the imagination for the better moving of the will. It's kind of similar to St. Augustine's. Supply reason to the imagination for the better moving of the will. That is, I can provide you reasons, I can make you imagine a situation that you might need to prepare for, or get out of, or it might be dangerous, and then it might move you into action to get ready for it, or to avoid doing it. So rhetoric's trucking along, all the way through the early modern period. We're talking maybe 17th century. And then every story needs a really good bad guy. Right? We need a good bad guy. So this is like one of my favorite bad guys, Darth Vader. I don't know how you feel about Darth Vader. But the Darth Vader of rhetoric, the person who was a rhetorician and then turned on everybody and collapsed everything into the dark times, is a scholar named Peter Ramus. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Peter Ramus. There's an image of him, not as cool as St. Augustine. He's like the enemy of rhetoric, so he doesn't really get a good picture. Like
His beard kind of
Quintilian's
looks
had.
like mine, don't you think?
Oh yeah, you're kind of looking Remus-like.
I'm going for the Ramus there.
Yeah, pretty good.
Yeah. He was beloved by his students.
Was he? No.
They hated
So
him. They hated him.
he was caught up in some violence in Paris, and an angry mob stormed into his office, and he was grading papers, and they threw him out the window.
To his death.
Yeah, he wasn't on the first floor.
By the way, you know my office is on the 6th floor of this place. I asked for it in honor of Peter Ramus. So feel free to try to do me in. I will gladly go in the way of my hero, Peter Ramus.
Yeah, so Peter Ramus is writing in the 1600s, and he is an expert in quintillion, who we just talked about. Somebody who lived long, long, long before him. And he kind of felt like, in looking at Quintillion's work, that he found the best definition and the most appropriate definition of rhetoric. The perfect rhetoric would be to have no rhetoric at all, meaning, if somebody can see or know that you're doing rhetoric, they might be like, well, this is just a construction. How good is this knowledge? It's just a construction. It's just something you made up. How good is the knowledge? It would be better to not have to do that at all, and we would just have knowledge. So this is where rhetoric becomes diminished and pushed back, not as the engine of knowledge, not as the engine of creating things for us to know and share with each other, but into just presentation. Which brings us to the elocution movement. As we move into the 1700s, 1700s, rhetoric becomes defined as only presentation. And here's two pictures that are pretty far apart from each other, time-wise. This first one on the left is from a public speaking textbook. And this is from the 19th century. It's very strange. It's like just a bunch of different positions that someone can stand in. But what they thought is that each one of these positions would communicate to the audience how they should feel about what you're saying. So it's not clearly labeled here. It's on the facing page where all these little numbers are. And they're like, this is the gesture of melancholy. And it's like, and the audience is supposed to know what that means. So it's all very formulaic. It's all very plug and play. Elocution is about presentation only. Rhetoric is about looking and sounding good and doing the right kind of motions, like sadness, or like contemplation.
While you're speaking, you're making these maneuvers.
Yeah, but you had to remember there was a right way to do it. So it's we've come really very distant from the ancient view of rhetoric, where it was sort of like contextual, like Aristotle's definition, very contextual, very set for whatever the situation was that people found themselves in. Now we're to where it's like, there's a menu of things and you should do these things, you'll be fine. But it's all okay because the knowledge comes from somewhere else. Rhetoric is just about packaging the knowledge that comes from philosophy or science or history. That has nothing to do, rhetoric is just about presentation. On the right, this is a picture from Penn State, I think in the 1940s. And this is someone teaching rhetoric, and they're teaching you how to form your mouth to where you say the words properly. So trying to get rid of accents, trying to have that good mid-Atlantic sound, which was very popular in the 1940s, that kind of accent. I think you know what I'm talking about. If you listen to old radio broadcasts, it's this kind of thing. There was a way of doing, so they would teach people like poetry recitation and how to pronounce the words correctly. It was about things like embouchure, stance, your breathing. There are a lot of old speech books from the 20th century. This is in the 20th century, in the 19th, 20th century, that combine physiology with speech. How to make sure you put enough breath behind it to where you're enunciating your P's correctly. And there's a lot of problems with that. We could probably list the problems with this all night, but they're just problems that we would recognize today as a 21st century audience. Particularly like a professor touching a student like this is probably not permitted anymore at all. But the idea that there would be a correct way to say things that would be depart from the situation, depart from culture, depart from your background.
What were they trying to do in like the 1940s in America when they were teaching people how to speak correctly? What was their goal? To make everybody speak alike and get rid of an accent was considered a disadvantage, like it was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted everybody to speak like Middle America, actually Mid-Atlantic Americans. And they said you had no accent. And you would actually go and learn how to lose your accent.
Yeah, that's right. And you know, some people still believe this today. Just like I think there's some people who still believe that the way you stand and the way you maintain eye contact and stuff can have subconscious or unconscious effects on persuasion. There's some of that. There's like 80s, 70s, 1970s, 80s theory of what is it?
Body language.
Yeah, NLP, was it natural language? Neurolinguistic.
Yeah, pattern.
Yeah, neurolinguistic patterns, to where I can like B.F. Skinner. You guys know B.F. Skinner in the Skinner box? This is a guy who taught pigeons how to play the piano and chickens how to play baseball. He was the guy who studied classical conditioning. He's like, the reason we continue to do something is it gives us pleasure, We stopped doing it because it gives us pain. And he thought humans were just much more complicated, chickens or pigeons or whatever. But you can go watch on YouTube, you can watch the video of the chickens playing the baseball. It looks like they understand baseball, but it's just this very complicated food reward pattern that he gave them when certain things happen. And Skinner is kind of an enemy of the classical rhetoric idea because he's sort of saying, look, you know, if you just follow these patterns, you do these things, these will trigger the biological organism of the person in the audience to respond in the appropriate way. So it's all just flattened out. There's no room for us to think or to make maneuvers, stuff like that. So elocution is around for a long time. Very long time. But in the heart of elocution, you know, things look pretty bad. The school of rhetoric's been taken over by a bad guy. But we kind of need a good guy to come along and save us. And that is where this person comes. I picked this because he kind of looks like Harry Potter, I think. He doesn't have the scar. There we go.
Hey,
So he kind of looks like Harry Potter, so I picked him as Harry Potter. So
he's the hero.
yeah, this is the guy who challenges elocution. And he was a professor here at Cornell in the 1920s. And he started what became, what is now probably the most practiced art of rhetoric, the thing that most rhetoricians do the most. And I think we'll hear a little bit more about him after we take a break.
Yeah.
It's a good time to take a
So
break.
let's take a little break, like about a 10-minute break. Go use the bathroom, go splash water on your face, go take whatever illegal drugs you need to do to get through the next hour and a half. And then there'll be a little time at the end to come up here and ask Steve questions and that sort of thing. Get his autographs
Yeah.
after every break. Okay.
Well, I'm glad you all came back. I don't have any points to hold over your head or anything. Now what we're going to do is look at the second part. This is probably the most prominent way rhetoricians do their work today. Not a lot of them are speech teachers. Not a lot of them are teaching argument or teaching this kind of persuasion. There's a few who are doing that. And there might be writing programs. You might have taken freshman composition or first year writing. And that's kind of how rhetoric is done in that productive art, the old school way. What rhetoric has done is kind of taken back some of its power and authority by going around through the back end, through thinking of rhetoric as an interpretive art, maybe not a productive one. This is this man right here who started the ball rolling. An English professor here at Cornell University, he was really into literary criticism, which is the art of taking a poem or a play or story and saying, here's why this is valuable, here's why this matters, here's why we choose to read something like Moby Dick over some other book. And that's what literature professors do, literary criticism. And then he started to think, maybe, his name was Herbert Wilkins, and he said, maybe we could do the same thing with speeches. We listen to speeches on the radio, we read speeches in the newspaper. Remember, it's the 1920s. Maybe we could take some of the principles of literary criticism and apply them to speech. Maybe speech isn't just ornamental, maybe it's not, maybe it has something to do with the creation of value of speech. Maybe there's something about it, just like there's something about the structure of the poem or the references of a poem that make it more valuable. And this is what he started to think about. So in 1922, he wrote an essay called Toward the Literary Criticism of Oratory, and it really took off in a big way. These are some quotes from him. Rhetorical criticism, which is what he called his new art, which is the name we still call it today in 2025, 100 years, over 103 years later.
Yeah. And it's
We
the
still
end of
call
your
it.
textbook.
Yeah, we call it rhetorical criticism, and it's something that if you go to graduate school in rhetoric, you'll learn it. Rhetorical criticism is necessarily analytical. This is a big shift from productive. It's about analysis. It's about figuring out the meaning, figuring out what something can mean. And throughout such study, one must conceive of the public man as influencing the men of his own times by the power of his discourse. So this is a big move here. Today we would say people, but the study of rhetorical criticism necessitates an audience. So instead of looking at the speech as something that exists alone, Wilkins says we have to think of the audience and that the speaker wrote the speech to try to get the audience to do something, think something, believe something. This is what sets rhetorical criticism apart from literary criticism, is deep, 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 and unattached, completely attached concern for audience. The audience is a part of how you understand the speech's value. And these things came out of his essay. This creates the internationally known Cornell School of Rhetoric, which many, many, many people come to study with Wilhelm's. Many famous scholars, almost every big advance in rhetorical theory is American, and it comes from this place right here, Cornell University.
And by the way, is there still a Cornell School of Rhetoric? No.
No.
The only little tiny connection to Cornell that they have, to the Cornell School of Rhetoric, is this class that you're in, stuck in the basement of Ives Hall, illegally meeting on Monday nights without anybody
The
noticing.
Rebel Alliance.
The last vestige of the Cornell School of Rhetoric, you are part of it, my brothers and sisters and comrades.
Because I mean, I talk about it like this one, but a lot of people still think of rhetoric as just purely elocution, don't they?
Like how
It's
well
just
can
about
you say
sounding
something?
good. It's sounding really good.
Oh, that's just rhetoric.
Or they think of it as the opposite of doing something. Like recently in the news, they're like, well, we'll have to see if these tariffs are just Trump's rhetoric or if he's really going to do them. Like we heard that for many days. We'll have to see if the rhetoric of the administration is really going to live up to what they promised to do. So we see it as oppositional. So that's an elocutionary hangover, I would say. And Wilhelm's was kind of fighting against that. So what did they do? They went back to Aristotle's rhetoric, and they said, here's how we can analyze speeches. Aristotle lays it out. So Aristotle said there are 3 different kinds of speeches that you can give. Deliberative, about things that could happen in the future. What should we do about this or that? Should we march into Greenland or whatever? That'd be a deliberative rhetorical speech. Epideictic, about the now, celebration. What do we value? Who are we today? What do we want? Who are we? What do we stand for? These are speeches about our values and our community values and our what does it mean to be American? This kind of thing. And forensic are speeches about the past. What happened? How did these events occur? Did someone do something bad in the past? How do we know? Did they do something good? How do we know? Judging the past. So that's what Aristotle outlines as the 3 primary ways that you can speak.
Sorry to interrupt, just for
Yeah.
a second. So I'm a senior lecturer here in ILR, I've been here for like 20 years. And I'm the director of the debate team, but I have another title. Does anybody know what it is? Director of Forensics.
I thought it was Cornell's most wanted, the way
That
we were
too.
talking earlier.
But yeah, sexiest man at Cornell. But the thing is, Director of Forensics, actually, if, like on my business card and stuff, it says Director of Forensics. And so that was because forensics has to do with speech, right? And that, it's like an old title that has existed for many years, right? And they're like, oh, you're the new Director of Forensics. And I'm like, okay, whatever. And so when I first got here, I went to get a parking pass. And they're like, what is your title? And I think they meant like professor, or president, vice president, whatever, right? And I was like, Director of Forensics. And they're like, ooh, you need a good parking pass. And I was like, yes, I do. And they're like, yeah, because you have to move those bodies around. Because they thought it was medical forensics, which medical forensics has to do with inquiry, like autopsies and stuff. And forensics, the study of forensics, is analyzing why did things happen in the past. That's the same sort
Yeah,
of
what happened? is the big
inquiry,
question.
right? Inquiry. But I'm not a director of medical forensics. I'm just a director of regular old forensics. But I did not correct them. And they said, why do we have a director of forensics in the ILR school? I was like, oh, they're on to me. So I gave the best answer. Who's gonna solve the murders? And they're like, oh, sorry, here. And they gave me like the best parking pass ever. And then they found out about me and took it away. Now I'm parked far away. I got away with it for a little while.
It's too bad.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, so actually Sam brings up a good point here, which is each one of these types of speech can be thought of as inquiry into something. Forensics is what happened, what went down in the past. Epideictic is who are we, what do we stand for, what are we about, the present. And deliberative is what should we do, what actions should we take, what needs to be done. Modes of proof. Everybody knows the modes of proof because you all took high school English, right? So you know Aristotle's 3 modes of proof. Logos, from which we get the word logic. Logos in ancient Greek just means word, but it can be translated as reason. And that would be common sense, or things that are reasonable, that you don't really need empirical evidence for. Reasonable arguments, like it makes sense that these things would have happened like this. Ethos, from which you get the word ethics. Ethos means credibility is the way it's translated, but it really means home as opposed to house. That's kind of the ancient Greek word. So it's like, this is my people, this is my home. This is who I stand for. So it's like a kind of a credibility, like goodwill. So ethos is like, how much do you trust the speaker? They make claims that the speaker really does represent, really does understand who we are and what we're about in this community. And pathos, from which you get the word pathetic or empathy, these are all Greek cognates in English. Pathos is about emotion, firing up the audience. How do they get the audience riled up or very sad? Cicero said that in court, your closing argument should either be about pity or indignation. Those are the two ways to get the jury on your side. Pity, like, feel sorry for my client. We should just really pity him. We should punish this person. Or indignation. I can't believe that we have to have this trial. I can't believe that we're doing it. What a waste of time. Can you believe that they brought this to... He's like, this works 100% of the time. Just pick the right one. So I don't know if that's what they teach in law school anymore. But the big thing about this early rhetorical criticism, or what we call the Cornell school, is it's really about effectiveness. If the speech was effective, it might be worth studying. So let's go back and reverse engineer it and say, oh, it was very effective because they used logos in an epideictic speech, which is unusual. Or maybe they shouldn't have done that. It's an epideictic speech. They should use more pathos because it's about values. And this is the way early rhetorical criticism kind of sounds. And it's also a little strange because using Aristotle, who we learned earlier tonight, is about creativity and teaching people how to speak, and not really about analytical tools, but it's about effectiveness. This changes over time. One of the students of the Cornell School, Edwin Black, who has Ph.D. here, published this groundbreaking essay, which is still cited all the time today, in 1970, called The Second Persona. And this is Ed Black's attempt to say rhetorical criticism isn't just about effectiveness, but about appropriateness. Should that speaker have made those claims? Should they have characterized things that way? This isn't a question of fact or not fact, like you would see like the factometer, like in presidential debates. It's not a question of that. It's the characterization of the case and the characterization of the audience. Was that appropriate? We can judge the speaker saying that they're it's not manipulating the audience, but the picture that they're painting might have ethical problems or might have moral problems. So let's take a look into this idea, because this is one of the most significant understandings of rhetoric, I think, that...
Also, remember this guy, Wilhelm, starts the school, calls it the Cornell School of Rhetoric. By the way, just a little insight into Wilhelm's. He's in the English department, right? And he's like, I want to study public speaking. They're like, that's not English. What's wrong with Shakespeare? What's wrong with written stuff? He goes, that's not what I'm into. I'm into rhetoric. They're like, all right, you got tenure, do what you got to do, but don't expect any help from us. So he actually paid someone to make a sign that said Cornell School of Rhetoric. He didn't get anybody's approval. And he just put it over his office. And like supposed to get approval from people and stuff. He just made it. And then people started coming and they started having workshops and it became world famous. It was the school to go to. And his most famous, I would say Edwin Black is probably his most famous.
There's so many. I have a book. Sam and I both really like books. So I have a book from 1960 from Cornell University Press. And it's the hardbound book that was made as a gift for everyone who came to Wilhelm's retirement party. And it's his original essay and then essays of all of his world famous students talking about his influence on their life. And it has a picture of him as an old man that I probably should put up there.
Yeah.
The picture of him as an old man, and I should scan it in.
After
But it's great because it's a who's who of people who are studying rhetoric, rhetorical criticism, and who are teaching big lecture classes on rhetorical theory all over the country. And they all traced it back to what Wilhelm did here. And this is something fundamental. There's so many books on rhetorical criticism. And even essays published this year, 2025, still citing Edwin Black.
And remember, he started in the 1920s
Yeah.
and he retired in the 1960s.
Yeah, he's a young guy when he wrote
So
the piece.
someday you will be asked to write a similar thing about me, right? And you'll all be like, yes, I took Sam's Rhetoric of the Labor Movement and now I'm a famous labor rhetorician. Or maybe not, whatever. And now I'm serving 20 to life or whatever. But hopefully they publish a book like that for when I retire.
Wouldn't that be great?
That
I don't
would
think
be
it
great.
happens for everybody.
I'd like it.
Yeah, it would be nice.
Maybe someone in here will write an essay.
I am not that influential, guys. So let's look at some of Black's arguments. So here's the understanding of what the second persona is, which is the speaker's characterization of the audience, which the audience is invited to take on that identity. They make it so attractive. So his example is talking about the radical right in the 1960s. In the discourse of the radical right, as with all discourse, we find enticements not simply to believe something, but to be something. This is the shift. It's not just about what facts or what evidence or how persuasive or logical you are. It's the enticement to be something. You are a part of something bigger than yourself. This is almost like ideology in a way. It's the thing that makes you think, oh yeah, I want to be a part of that movement. I want to be a part of that team. I want to be a part of that club. We are solicited by the discourse to fulfill its blandishments with our very selves. That is, this is an intellectual agreement. We're going to act and behave in a way to where we fulfill that suggested role of the audience as the speaker has told us who we are. And it's this dimension of rhetorical discourse that leads us to moral judgment. So instead of just looking at what proof they used or what kind of speech it was, let's look at how they talked to the audience and how they characterized that audience. And that characterization can then make the audience do things they might not normally do.
Let me just
It goes on.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Let me just go on, just make a quick comment here, just a show of hands. How many people think they have some core values that they would not violate? Like you think like killing is bad, shouldn't cheat, or, you know, whatever. You have some core values in your life. Okay, all those people that didn't raise their hand, please come and see me. I have a job for you with the CIA. But everybody else, most people say, I have some core values, whatever. The question is, how do you get these core values? And is it possible that someone could say something that you would join, a way of thinking that other people think like, that you would adopt maybe new core values or reify core values that you have, right? And you're like, yeah, I do think we should make America great again, or whatever, right? And that's done through rhetoric.
Yeah, so this is another quote. You probably read it by now, so I might not read it to you. But I think that the important line is this first line, which is the critic, the person looking at the speech, can see in the auditor, implied by a discoursive model of what the rhetor would have his real auditor become. So this is like a second level. It's not just intellectual or factual agreement. It's like, who do I want you to be? What kind of person do I want to accept this intellectual and logical agreement? What kind of identity do they have? This is a much deeper read and a real twist on Wilhelm's, what Wilhelm's was saying. And so this is what Black wanted us all to do. But he was basing his work on somebody who was a contemporary of his, somebody who was not taught at the Cornell Rhetoric School at all, somebody who has a cool picture. I had to bring the cool picture guys back. You know, we had bad Peter Amos picture. Wilhelm had a good picture.
This dude
This
was
guy.
stylish.
This guy is like, this is his author picture for his book. Very strange, right? So he asked important questions about rhetoric in his lifelong study of it. Is the goal of rhetoric rational, reasoned persuasion? Do people hear reasons and simply change their minds? This is kind of the model of rhetoric that we get. And very simple. It's like, if I provide a factual, logical argument, people will listen to it. They'll go, oh yeah, But that's not really how it works. And this person said, well, it's not really what rhetoric is about. Rhetoric is about identification. It's about wishing that you are a part of something that you may or may not be a part of, but you identify with. You make every possible and conceivable move to be a part of that thing and identify with it, even if you might be very distant from it. And this is Kenneth Burke. Kenneth Burke is the most influential rhetorical theorist of the 20th century for sure, definitely of probably even the 21st. It's hard to think of somebody more influential than Kenneth Burke.
What
Here are
about
his
ever?
definitions
Ever?
of... It's hard, maybe Aristotle. But it's hard to think of somebody more influential, this guy. Kenneth Burke, Kenneth Burke had a weird life. He was a member of the Communist Party in the 1950s in the United States. And then he went to, he was blacklisted by HUAC, you know, the McCarthy hearings and all that. He didn't get a job. But then he went to the American Communist Party meeting, and he was like, your rhetoric is wrong. And they're like, what do you mean? He's like, well, Americans don't want to be called fellow workers. They don't want to be called, you know, comrades and workers. Nobody wants to identify as a worker. Don't you know that everyone in America is a millionaire in waiting? Everyone's middle class, and everyone's going to be a millionaire one day. So they all support policy for millionaires right now because they think they're going to be a millionaire one day. And they're like, what? He's like, just stop calling people workers. They're like, all right, you're kicked out. So he was blacklisted by the American Communist Party and by the federal government for being a communist. So what do? Well, he went to Bennington College in Vermont and worked there for his career. He was a self-taught guy. Here are his definitions of rhetoric. He called rhetoric the realm of the subsidized lie. The scramble, the realm of cloaked malice. And rhetoric is forever proving opposites. That is, rhetoric never ends. It's always, once it concludes something, you can immediately take the opposite of that conclusion and go, and keep going, and keep going. You could have argument ad infinitum. So, Kenneth Burke is most influential for those of us who think that rhetoric is the study of how we make meaning. So this broadens rhetorical criticism out to be about just about anything. If it's about humans making meaning, we're no longer in the realm of speech. We can look at all kinds of different things. Rhetoric is a simultaneous movement of identification and division. If I identify with something, I am not purposely dividing from stuff, but the audience will see that I'm dividing from all these other things. Right? So if you see somebody wearing a MAGA hat, you know what they don't stand for. They might not want to make that claim, but we interpret it. That's what Kenneth Burke is talking about. They try to identify with something, but it comes with compensatory division. There's all these other things. So you see somebody wearing a shirt of a band you hate, you're going to make all these judgments about them. And it might just be like a borrowed shirt. You have no idea. So what does Burke say about that? Well, he says we want to be consubstantial with the things that we love. We want them to be a part of us, whatever they might be. Music, art, film, actors, sports teams, athletes. And we try to live our lives to where people will identify us as being consubstantial with that. That's how we get our meaning. That's how we interact with each other. When we see people identifying and being consubstantial, we make judgments about their motives. So you see somebody wearing a shirt, you're like, oh, they're wearing that because they must like da-da-da, they must like these things, da-da-da. They're doing that because these are their motives. And then we generate an attitude about those motives. Now, what's important here to note is that these motives are not communicated through fact or logic or reason, but almost by accident. So right now, you're hearing me talk, you're sizing what my motives might be, and you're generating an attitude about me. And this is what, for Burke, is natural human interaction. This is the way humans function. And this is a way of doing rhetorical criticism that is very, very popular, and it can be done almost anything, even on something as small as a gesture. Something as small as a gesture. So now we're going to move into an example that I want to study with you and show you how a rhetorician looks at something and how a rhetorician might interpret it and what kind of things we would look at to show you just how broad the Burkean rhetorical criticism idea goes and how the black rhetorical criticism goes and everything. So I'm going to show you a short video clip of a gesture.
And are you asking them to interpret it?
We're going to interpret it together.
Are people familiar with this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure you are. Who has not seen this?
I don't have a TV or radio or any connection.
We don't have any sound.
The guy in the back should help us.
I think it's asleep.
The importance of enough, but this one, this one really mattered. And I just want to say thank you for making it happen. Thank you. My heart goes out to you. It is thanks to you that the future of civilization is assured.
Wow, that's a big claim, right? Okay, so this was at Donald Trump's inaugural, and he did that motion twice, and people immediately said, well, that's a Nazi salute. That's a Nazi salute. And everyone started to go into this battle of interpretation based on, well, what are his motives? He did this thing. He's identified with the Nazis. Is he a Nazi? Is he anti-Semitic? The Anti-Defamation League immediately put this tweet out and called it an awkward gesture in a moment of enthusiasm, not a Nazi salute. The Anti-Defamation League. So he's in the clear, right? He's in the clear. But one of the things as rhetoricians that we're interested in is this question of who has interpretive authority over something you say, write, or do. Does Elon Musk have interpretive authority over his gesture? Do experts, like the ADL, you think the ADL would know what a Nazi salute is, right? They would be the defining, I mean, they spin their, so. The situation gets a little bit deeper. There's a BBC News report where Musk interprets his gesture on X. Frankly, they need better dirty tricks. The everyone is Hitler attack is so tired. So he's trying to sort of defy, oh, they're the ones who are putting this on me. This is kind of interesting. So as rhetoricians, we're not interested in whether this is actually a Nazi salute or not. We're not interested in the truth of it. We're interested in how do people come to the understanding that it is one? Or how do people say it is not one? How do they move it? How do they divide? How do they identify? And so I could write a whole paper on this. It goes on. An international art group, German art group, did this to the Tesla factory in Berlin. They projected that on there and put it on their Instagram. Now you do know, in Austria and Germany, making a gesture like this is a crime that comes with a mandatory minimum prison sentence. Denying the Holocaust, displaying a swastika, doing a Nazi salute, you'll be immediately arrested, you'll be given a trial, but then you have to spend, I think, the minimum is 3 years in prison. So they projected this on the Berlin factory.
That is owned by Musk.
And then, what else have we got to look at? Here's something from Reddit. Oh, it's not playing. I wonder if I can get it to play. There you go. So somebody made this GIF. This is kind of an interesting argument. So this is identification for sure. The way they've timed it out, the way they've set it up, it looks like exactly the same gesture, doesn't it? It's like perfect symmetry.
What is the difference?
That's a great question. Well, the difference is that Musk is an enthusiastic gesture. I guess Hitler's is too. I don't. I think Hitler's enthusiastic too. But isn't that interesting? They would set that up. So as a rhetorician, we look at that and we're like, look at how this person's trying to bring it together and be like, look at exactly how that argument is being put together. Identification. But another thing to think about is we are really far from speech here. Here we are on a Reddit post with an animated GIF. Or is it GIF? You guys fight about this? GIF. I always say GIF, maybe I'm wrong. But somebody made an animated GIF to prove their point here. Is that speech? Is that rhetoric? Thanks to Kenneth Burke, thanks to the Cornell School, a lot of times we can say yes. Yes, it absolutely is. Here's another of Musk's defenses of what he did. So somehow he thinks this is a defense of what he did. I don't know, making jokes about it. This tweet changed the mind of the ADL. So Jonathan Greenblatt, who's the president of the ADL, he's actually a very, very good rhetorician, very well-spoken guy. He's on, oddly, I see him on CNBC a lot. I don't know why he's on the financial news network, but he's talking a lot about the things they're doing against universities and the encampments, the Palestinian encampments, how they're working with universities to ban these things. And he says, the Holocaust was a singularity, evil event, and is inappropriate and offensive to make light of it. And then his staff was like, making inappropriate and highly offensive jokes that trivialize the Holocaust only served to minimize the evil and inhumanity of Nazi crimes, Then, there's a very popular conservative account on TikTok. You guys use TikTok? Chinese intelligence. Loves you. No, I don't. I mean, we can also talk about TikTok. That's a good thing for rhetorical analysis, too, is how do we know that something is bad? How do we know something is good? How do people make the arguments about that? On TikTok, there's a great account called Libs of TikTok. You guys know this account? Yes. Yeah, Libs of TikTok. So Libs of TikTok posted a four-square image of four different politicians making the same, four different Democratic politicians, Obama, Hillary, all making the same Nazi salute. And I couldn't find the original of that, but this person quoted it and then made an animated GIF to show what the, Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren. Yeah, thank you. So then somebody made a clip of that to show the differences in what these movements look like. So here's down in the, this is the neo-Nazi march in the United States. That's Obama's supposed Nazi gesture. There's Kamala Harris's supposed Nazi gesture. And Elon's.
They're slightly different.
Yeah.
Wait.
Just a little bit. Yeah, right. Elizabeth Warren, the Nazi. Yeah. So it's interesting how people try to bring things together and close together in the way that people are pushing. This is the kind of thing that we do in rhetorical criticism, and look at this kind of thing. It's not a speech, but it would be considered rhetoric. All right, so now we get into another level of that. But before we get to the next level of this keeps going on and on and on. I don't know if you guys have followed this, but it gets wild. We're about to go into some of the wilder arguments about identification division. What are your thoughts about this so far? You see the difference between how a rhetorician would look at it versus, the way the journalists look at it is like, is this a Nazi salute or not? Let's go to Burger King, we'll talk to 4 Americans, whatever they do, right? Or NPR will have one of their reporters, named Chesterton or something, talk about it. Any thoughts, questions, observations?
Yeah, what is the difference? Someone articulate the difference, the way a rhetorician, as Steve has been explaining it, looks at this phenomenon as the way that a reporter would look at it. What's the difference? What is the question the reporter is asking? What is the question that the rhetorician is asking? Or the questions?
Yeah.
I feel like a reporter is just looking to like monetize and think about what sells, whereas a rhetorician would look at it and ask like, should the speaker be making those claims, or did they intend for it to be characterized those ways, and like what are like the bigger problems that this is like rippling towards society, and like the bigger picture, like the second persona of like how you're part of something bigger than yourself, versus like somebody who's trying to run like a news platform that's skewed to whatever political party they're trying to like please, like is different than how a rhetoric will look at it and try to figure out like more like the intellectual like meaning behind it.
Yeah, no, very good. I think one of the things that rhetoricians are interested in is how we get swept up in when we think we have the truth. Like the more we believe the truth, the less articulation, the less detail we get into it because we feel like it's so obvious. And then when people try to substantiate it and make claims like this, I would say this is a claim that someone's making, even though it's on Reddit, and Reddit's kind of like, I don't know what you feel about that place. This place where people are making public claims with each other to get people to believe things. So I think that would be rhetorical. And I think you have a very cynical view of the media. I like that. They're out to make money. They're out to, here's what's going to monetize. Here's what's going to keep you watching CNN.
I don't think all news platforms are like that, but I think a lot of them are, and I think that's what would skew like anything that somebody does.
Yeah, they're going to lead with things they think are going to keep you watching because CNN sells ads, MSNBC sells ads, Fox News sells ads. So they're going to try to lead with things that they'll be like, deadly tornadoes coming towards your house. We'll have more after this. And it's like Applebee's 2-for-1 shrimp combo. It's like, I'm about to be killed by a tornado. I can't plan dinner at Applebee's right now. I got to wait and see what's coming on next. So yeah, you're right. But I think instead of journalism, which is about trying to construct a story about what happened and what really happened, I think in rhetoric we're like, how do people come to believe what really happened, and how do they communicate that? And on what things are they leaning in order to communicate what they think is true? So we kind of back off of anything like intent. We back off of anything like that. And we'll look at this and say, wow, look at this, how they construct it. Why did they choose to do it like that? Every little thing becomes analyzed. So yeah, I think it was a good comment. I also have a cynical view of mass media. It's hard to know where to go for good information these days. Everything seems so polarized and so corrupt. Very tough.
Just believe everything and then use your own mind to think for yourself.
Believe everything and
Believe
critically analyze.
everything and then just start discarding.
Okay, well, the next, I think it's a good point. All right, let's go deeper into this because it gets a little bit weirder. Defenses of Elon Musk turn to him being autistic. And that he was autistic and so he didn't know what he was doing. And so this sparked an entire new argument about what does it mean to be autistic and how should we characterize them? What's an autistic person like? And so there's endless, these are just a couple of examples of it. So here's someone saying, as a person with a strong track record of criticizing Elon Musk, I feel extremely confident asserting this was not a Nazi salute. Elon Musk is a friend of the Jews. This is a man with Asperger's exuberantly throwing his heart into the crowd. We don't need to invent outrage. And the response is, and then the GIF. So this person felt like they didn't even need to say anything to refute her argument. But it's interesting that her claim is like, no, he can't be a Nazi. This is him, this is enthusiastic autism.
No, actually, she's quote tweeting his original tweet with the video. She's responding to his.
Oh, she's responding. So he's saying this doesn't need any characterization at all.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
He's like a liberal reporter on Twitter.
Oh, okay. And she's saying no. I do not, I think I know Elon Musk, and this is what he's really
Yeah.
like. So sometimes we make this argument to go deeper. Like, we have to understand who he is, where he's coming from. And then we have this tweet. I think it's funny that a lot of this stuff is happening on X that Elon Musk owns, right? So it's like permitting it happening. Yeah. This one is pretty funny. No, I'm autistic. I wouldn't make any movement even close to a Nazi, especially in front of a crowd at such a heightened political time. STFU, Elon Musk is a Nazi loser. So this kind of race forward. But this is in traditional, what I would call the rhetoric of Twitter. This is what tweets look like, and effective tweets kind of have this like run-on, excitable, abbreviated kind of feel to them. Strange kind of public discourse, but public discourse nonetheless is something that should be paid attention to. So one of these things, this went all the way back, this kind of went into a fight that went all the way back to the Democratic National Convention and the behavior of Tim Walz' son, Gus. You might remember this. When Tim Walz is giving his acceptance speech, Tim Walz's disabled, autistic son reacted to the speech and got a lot of arguments about his autism coming at him. So we'll watch this clip.
Gus Walz sat front row for the biggest moment of his father's life, and his pride exploded out of him.
Hope, Gus, and Gwen, you are my entire world, and I love you.
That's my dad, the 17-year-old could be seen saying. He stood with tears streaming down his face, pointing to his father, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, as he accepted the Democratic.
Do you remember this? Yeah, this made a lot of news headlines, but it also got a lot of attention from critics too, from conservative critics. Now these tweets were defined because they were deleted by the conservatives once. They were like, oh, but he's autistic. So then Ann Coulter deleted her tweet. She never deletes anything. Like she's
Cornell
very,
graduate, by the way.
Oh, is she? Oh, is she ILR?
No.
Okay. Proud ILR graduate. Ann Coulter. This guy Jay Weber is a conservative radio host. He actually posted an apology for this tweet once that defense was made. So it's kind of interesting because now you can kind of see this pattern of where do we source our arguments for these kind of public things on two different parties. So the conservatives had to like backtrack on this autistic argument, so why not make it for Elon? And then maybe the liberals would have to backtrack. That might be an argument I would make in analyzing it. I'd be like, oh, they're drawing from the Democratic Convention from last year. They see how they got completely owned by that argument. Maybe they're going to try that strategy to defend Elon, who's somebody who they want to defend for whatever reasons they might articulate. I'd have to go and look and see what people are, what MAGA, it's so like divided now, what MAGA conservatives are saying who like Elon still. There's a bunch of them who don't. Like he's starting to lose favor, but what are they saying about why he's valuable in the administration? And are they using the autism argument to justify his enthusiastic gesture or Nazi salute, depending on what you want to call it? Kind of interesting, huh? It continues on. Yeah?
I kind of find the autism defense interesting because it shifts from a defense about intent alone to sort of intent and capacity.
Yeah.
Because I feel like you could argue, oh, he didn't intend for it to be a Nazi salute, but he's still responsible for his imaging. Even if it's an accident, he needs to know what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
But if you could argue that he's autistic, you could say, well, he can't control it, so it's not his fault, and you shouldn't look at being responsible for it as just a side effect either.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's a super cool argument because it's almost like an intent of non-intent argument. It's like he can't have intent. Intent's impossible for him, so therefore he has no blame. But then the optics of it, like you're saying, are like, well, if somebody feels attacked or feels slighted or feels threatened by a gesture or something you say, does intent get you out of that, or should it get you out of that? Then there should non-intent get you out of that.
Yeah.
It still causes harm, right? So I think the autism defense is so interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm just surprised we have not seen it more in public life.
Yeah. I do remember in Trump's first term that he made fun of an autistic person at a press conference. Do you remember that? Where he mocked the person, did all this stuff. And no one's bringing that up, right? Like they've forgotten that. And now they're like, oh, and he has an excuse that you should make fun of because you've already said this is wrong.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They're shedding their past arguments. There's no need to be consistent.
No,
Yeah.
no, there's no consistency because I think that the news cycle kind of governs the consistency.
Yeah.
The news cycle is maybe less than a day. But I also think with Donald Trump, he's such an interesting case because any other politician would be like totally excoriated for some of the things he's saying. But I think we've come to expect him to say crazy things. And if they're not like over the top crazy on that standard, they just kind of get ignored. Like the terrible midair disaster at Reagan Airport, the helicopter and the plane, you know, saw this? Horrible, horrible air design, worse than 16 years. A reporter asked Trump if he was going to visit the crash site, and he was like, what, you think I'm going to go swimming? President. Now, no president has ever talked like this that we know of. I mean, there might have been some who said this, and maybe the reporters are like, don't print that.
Yeah.
But now in this age where everything's recorded and immediately shared, but I mean, for Donald Trump, it's rather tame. So everyone goes, that's how it is.
I've heard the theory that Trump purposely tries to say like something that's just out of this world, like every day. And the reason why is he says, okay, we need to take over Iceland. And everybody goes, oh my God. And then the next day he says, and it needs to be called the Gulf of America. And they immediately forget about Iceland. And then, because they're now talking about Gulf of America. Then he comes up with something else and something else. He's intentionally doing this so you can't focus. It divides people that think it's all crazy because he's just gonna outdo himself the next day with something even more outrageous.
Not to be the boring teacher, but we would say he's not intending to do it. We would blank that. And we'd say, here's what this does to the audience.
You don't care what his intention is.
We abandon intent in rhetorical.
But what if it is his intention? Do you even give a damn?
We don't touch it.
Because you can never know what a person.
Well, we're more interested in the audience and how meaning is constructed. So if we say this person meant to do this, it kind of makes our arguments a little bit lazier. What we want to do is kind of like, so a lot of analysis, especially from people who are educated in the age of where science can do no wrong, which is all you guys, it's all about narrowing down to the truth, and that's what inquiry is. Inquiry and rhetoric is like kicking up dust and making a bunch of shadow figures and complicating things. Look at all the possible ways this can be interpreted. Look at all the possible things that are going on, and that's where the conclusions of the most interesting rhetoric work usually land.
I think, Sam, what you're talking about is the Gish Gallop, which is like it's where like a person like makes like so many bullshit claims like in succession that then at that point the people that oppose that person have to spend so much time refuting all of those individual bullshit claims that probably by the time they're done, the average person is like, okay, who the fuck cares anymore? You know? And it just takes so long to like go through all of those because then the burden of proof is on the person that they're opposed to.
Yeah, it's an argument ad ignorantum, is what we call it.
Yeah.
Classical fallacy.
But to me, it's interesting. At some time, we have a Trump persona, right? Everybody, they know who he is. He's been president for a while. We know who he is. And so when he says something, a normal politician, like every other politician in the world, right? Except maybe Vance, who's starting to talk about like childless cat ladies and stuff.
Oh yeah, we forgot about that one.
Yeah. But it is like, well, that's unforgivable. You know, he paid hush money to a porn star. That would crush anybody's career. No.
34
He
felonies.
can do anything.
Yeah.
In fact, he brags about it, right? He says, I can shoot somebody on
Fifth Avenue.
And nothing would happen. So, for some weird reason, he's figured out this works for him, right? And he is kind of weirdly, like, people don't treat him like they do a normal president up to this. Maybe this is the new standard, right? I can't imagine what will be after this. Like, what will the next person say? Maybe the Democrats need to learn, right, from this and, run Al Franken against him, who had to give up. He was a professional comedian, and he did like a kind of a risque thing and resign from the Senate. Trump would hold that up as like a reason to vote for him, right? So like our world is changing very quickly. It's very interesting. This may be a difference between me and Stephen, maybe not. Stephen says, I don't give a damn what they intend to do. Like, I don't care if there's a document that says, in my next speech, I will do these outrageous things in order to get people distracted from the real problems of the fact that they can't afford eggs or whatever, right? And then he goes, we can never know, and even if we could know, who cares? Because what's really important is how does the audience react to it. Whereas I'm like, that is interesting to me too, what their intent was. Like, and, I mean, part of it is I have like a law training, and what happens in law, in order to find someone guilty of a criminal offense, they have to have what's called a guilty mind, a mens rea. Whereas Stephen is, who cares about that? Who cares about what they were trying to do? How did the audience react to it? That's what rhetoricians study.
Yeah. So we can take like your co-student here, Ann Coulter, and
Yeah.
we can say, what's her intent here?
Fellow Cornell alum.
Yeah, what's her intent here? Doesn't really get us very far. But what we can do is we can say, what is her motive? We can take a Burkean point of view. Okay, now we have a lot more to go. What is she identifying with? What's going on? What's the context of this? What's the discourse around this tweet? You know, the word weird was thrown around quite a bit in the campaign. Well, Republicans are weird. And so she's probably responding to that in some way with the discourse, trying to get into that. But to look at her intent of what she's trying to do, and a lot of times Sam's right, we have all these documents. We can go and look at old presidents and see their notes and see drafts of speeches and their comments. We can say, here's what they're trying to do. And then we would look at what they say and we're like, huh, look at the gap there. Or look at the lack of a gap there, how weird. What did they actually say? How did the audience react to it? What were the responses like? And this is where rhetoric kind of works, is in this area here. But about the Gish Gallop, I think this is an interesting strategy that only works if one has a fact-based theory of argument, and not a conviction theory or persuasion theory or connection theory or a Burkean theory, any other kind of rhetorical theory of it. I think that it's a technology that exists and works really well if you think that the way to win an argument with somebody is to present facts. And that usually is not very successful. It looks like this. Say the fact. They don't agree. Say it louder. They don't agree. Say it louder and slower. They don't agree. Call them a fascist to walk away.
Yeah.
That's not how we run a democracy. It's not how we have to find a way in. And so the Gish Gallop works really well to shut people down who are like, that's not factual, that's not factual, that's a lie. And then they're just doing that the whole time. And what you're doing is just saying a bunch of things that create doubt in the mind of the audience. And then you end up getting the audience on your side. The best example of this is the Ken Ham Bill Nye debate about creationism, which was held at the Creationism Museum in Tennessee. Ken Ham is what do they call it? A young earth creationist, is that the correct term? And a born-again Christian, and he has this creation museum that has historical exhibits of people walking with dinosaurs and Noah's Ark and all these things. And he was like, I want to have a debate about creationism or science, which is the better story of how we've come to exist. And he invited Bill Nye to debate him.
Cornell graduate.
Bill Nye did a great job. Bill Nye did a great job. And Ken Ham didn't really do the Gish Gallop, but he did this nice kind of thing where he kind of set the attitude up. And because of that debate, he was able to generate a huge multi-million-dollar fundraising campaign to expand his work. And Bill Nye was kind of horrified. Because Bill Nye was like, I think it's pretty clear that we won that debate. But then Ken Ham still turned it into money. So it's interesting. I think it's a really interesting time when people have this incredibly frail and thin and like just kind of this grayscale idea of what it is to argue. No rhetoric at all. It's just like, I'm going to go get the facts and I'm going to say the facts. And if they don't believe the facts, I'm going to call them an idiot. Is not a great strategy. It just really isn't.
It's interesting, they do this thing on the
Burke has much better tools for this.
They do this thing on the presidential debates where they do fact checking.
Yeah.
And they have someone there after the people speak and they're like, these facts are wrong, and these facts are wrong, and they both said bad facts, and that's been disproven, you know, that thing. And it affects no one's opinion when who won the debate. 0% of the people. Oh, like, I was gonna believe them until those facts were disproven, right? But it's very interesting, they've done studies on like presidential debates, and they found out that people don't really watch the debates to decide who they're gonna vote for. What they watch them for is reasons they can give to their friends why they support the person they do. So they already know who they're gonna vote for, but they don't know why to say it. So they mimic the arguments they hear in the debates and tell everybody that. So
Yeah, it becomes grist for the mill.
Yeah.
That's what I always think of them as. But you know, you do these studies, you'll have people who haven't watched the debates, you're like, who do you like? And they might circle on a Likert scale, like a 6 or 7 for somebody. Let's say they circle like a 7 for Trump. Like they're like, it's still kind of in the middle. Or they'll circle like a 5 or something, still kind of in the middle. And then they have them watch like 10 or 15 minutes of the debate, and they're like, who do you like? It always goes in the direction you're already leaning. No one ever goes the opposite way in these studies, which I think is the reason why the parties love the presidential debate model and they'll never change it. And now they've gotten rid of the commission. The commission's kind of powerless, so
Yeah.
no one's going to enforce the law, it looks like. CNN can host a debate. The law says equal time. So if CNN gives Kamala Harris and Donald Trump 2 hours of airtime, they have to give every filed candidate 2 hours of airtime. Where's Vermin Supreme? Where's the socialist candidate? Where's the libertarian candidate? You know, they didn't get 2 hours of free airtime.
Yeah.
No one's going to enforce that, I don't think. Reagan kind of is the one who
Yeah.
kind of like,
In
a little bit. It's still the law, but people don't really enforce it.
When I was a graduate student here in the 80s, there was this government professor named Theodore Lowy, and he would have a debate at Cornell that everybody could go to. That was every presidential candidate that didn't get invited to the Republican versus Democrat. And it was like the Right to Life Party, the Libertarians, the Communist Party, you know, all these fringe parties. And I went to it, and it was the most fascinating thing ever. And they all liked each other. They were all like, yeah, too bad we're not able to express our ideas in front of everybody
Was
else.
Vermin Supreme there?
Huh?
Vermin Supreme?
I don't
He's
know.
my favorite.
I don't know.
He wears like a plumber's boot on his head.
No. I didn't
And he
see
talks
that.
about the government pony program. And you have to have your pony with you at all times to buy anything.
No, he's not there.
The anxiety reducing toothpaste, the mind control toothbrushing program, to make everyone peaceful.
Yeah, but it was interesting, the Libertarian and the
Very
Communist
fun.
Party guys, were there, you know, the diametrically opposed. And they're like, we agree on one thing and one thing only. We should not have to come to Cornell and speak in front of these few students, you know, but we should be on national TV with everybody else. Now there's a great book called The Death of Debate, where the Republicans and Democrats pretty much took it over to keep out third-party candidates. And it doesn't look like we'll ever have a three-way debate ever again.
I don't know what we're gonna have. It's like Wild West again. So we'll see. Anyway, presidential debate's another lecture. Let's finish the third part. We're done talking about autism. Well, autism might come up in a minute. It can always come up. You're gonna bring up anything up you want. So this is like the cutting edge kind of things that rhetoricians are looking at, different understandings of rhetoric. They go well beyond the autism disagreement and Elon Musk. Space, place, and memory is the way I characterize this, which is rhetoricians look at things like how an art exhibit is organized, or how a national memorial is constructed and how that impacts audience. This is Vietnam Memorial and the Korean War Memorial, very different. So a rhetorician might write and say, how do these different memorials, what do they do to the audience? What feelings are they what identifications are they trying to get from the audience? What kind of understanding are they trying to get across? So the first one is the rhetoric of inquiry. This is a big one. This is the rhetoric of science, the rhetoric of medicine, the rhetoric of any discipline, where what the rhetoricians are doing is they're saying that most science is a really well-made argument. Let's look at how science is convincing people that what it says is true. This isn't to say that science doesn't have any functionality or any value, but that science is very much like any other thing. People are convinced that it's true. Things like the double helix, people have written about that. How did this become the model of basically everything? Now everyone's like, oh, it's in my DNA. I'm not wired that way. This has become our language about, my DNA, math isn't in my DNA, I'm not good at it. It's become the reductive claim for all of our inabilities or abilities, for everything. How did this become the most convincing thing, or basically the identification of humanity? Brain scans. You know, brain scans are shown all the time. This could be like from the newspaper. They're like, we had a Democrat and Republican look at pictures of a border crossing, or Mexican border crossing, and look at how the Republican's brain lights up, or what. It could be anything like that. It's like, oh, we're our brains. We're the electrical impulses in our brains. How did this become a convincing way to tell each other apart or to understand difference? Is that we live in our brain. How did we be convinced of that? And history, and then of course like historical arguments and rhetoric of inquiry, like Copernicus, Galileo, these kind of historical things as well. So rhetoric of inquiry comes out of, I think it was the University of Iowa where it first started, but it's about looking at how fields that claim to reveal knowledge, how they make convincing claims that they have revealed knowledge. Science, art, literature, all these things. One of the more controversial ones in recent years, probably shouldn't be, is visual rhetoric. And visual rhetoric is the idea that a picture can provide the same kind of thing that rhetoricians study. Now, I just did a bunch of visual rhetoric analysis with you with the Elon Musk thing, so I kind of accept it. But a lot of people are saying that these images don't really convey something rhetoricians can really analyze. There's no words, there's no claim, there's nothing here. But if you take the Burkean view, you'd say, well, there are things you can identify with, things you divide with, and there are also similarities. People are acting based on some of these images. So the two images I picked here, this is Iwo Jima, flag raising at Iwo Jima, which was captured in World War II. And then over here is a photo that's called Ground Zero Spirit. This was captured on September 11th, 2001, of first responders, firefighters. They found a flag and they raised the flag at the site while it was still very like cleaning it up and figuring out. So this photographer, we don't know his intent or her intent or their intent. We don't know what they were trying to do. They're taking pictures. But it does look like these firefighters and the photographer identify or have some understanding visually of framing this kind of thing and what Iwo Jima photo means. Does it mean America will always come back? Does it mean America's too strong to be knocked down? What does all of this mean? Dorothea Lange, the famous photographer of the Great Depression, took all these photos. This is from the Library of Congress. Most of the time, you've seen this photo of just the woman's face from the Dust Bowl from the Great Depression. But I thought it would be neat to see the whole photo and see she has two kids with her there. And so the federal government sent out photographers and all kinds of people to photograph the Great Depression, to chronicle it, and she was one of the most famous photographers. So people write about all of this stuff from a rhetorical perspective, but it often gets criticized. People don't think there's enough there. I'm not of that persuasion. I think that rhetoric has been expanded. If you think of rhetoric as identification division, it can be just about anything. But people fight about the limits of that. So I think it's kind of a healthy thing.
And I think I told you that someone wrote an A+ paper in this class when they did a rhetorical analysis, because it has to be related to labor, right? Because rhetoric is labor movement, of this building that we're in. From a, you know, they knew they were making a labor school, and they're like, how do we do, what does the building, what does the architecture of the building say about the school, Cornell, and the teaching of labor? And it was super interesting. It was also kind of, I believe, kind of damning of the school. Because, as I mentioned in the first class, they didn't want it to seem fancy. They wanted it, because they were afraid it was weird to have like mahogany walls and chandeliers and stuff you see in other parts of Cornell. You know, if you go over to the art school, you see really Greek statues and stuff, right? Because they wanted to be like, well, we can't be in some fancy ivory tower when we're studying like, you know, farm workers, right? And so they purposely made it look very utilitarian, almost like a factory. And if you look at this place from the outside, it kind of looks like a post-industrial factory, and from the inside, these beautiful cinder blocks definitely look factory-like, right? And I especially like these.
I feel very safe in here.
Yeah, well, from like a nuclear war.
Yeah, from like any big explosion.
Yeah, and the windows are all these little skinny windows, which are great if you're like being attacked and you have to shoot your musket out like of the floor, but they don't actually let light in.
No.
And they even match this window inside, which doesn't go outside, to all the other windows. And they always have, in every room, they have these coat racks that in all my years of teaching here, over 2 decades, I've never seen anybody actually hang a coat on, except right now, there's a coat hanging on. But I believe it was, who hung that coat? Excellent.
That's great.
Congratulations, first person ever in the history of this building to hang a coat on one of those things.
Is that really true?
Yeah, I've never seen it, except right now.
I like the coat hanger. I'd use it.
But look, there's only one. Everybody has a coat, one guy.
All right.
What made you want to hang that coat up instead of behind your chairs?
I don't really, I just saw the hooks there.
You're like, let's do it, right? You were why this whole building was designed. Right.
Yeah.
Keep it up. Right?
Motives and attitude right there. All right. Well, that's pretty much it from me. So just remember, 3 different understandings of rhetoric. The first being this oratorical, art of persuasion, creative, productive art. The second being interpretive, looking at the speeches other people give, and then beyond speeches, to try to see how humans fight about meaning and come to terms about meaning, and the different ways that we can study that. And then the modern the very, very cutting edge sort of way of looking at images, institutions, spaces, looking at memorials, all these things. And I think all these things are accepted. I don't know of anybody who would say that any of the definitions I brought to you tonight, or any of the definitions you said, are wrong or should be tossed out. It's a very fluid field that doesn't really narrow understanding, but kind of tries to broaden all the different possible ways we can understand messages. So the question I started with, what is rhetoric? Still a great question. People are still trying to figure this out. And hopefully I've given you a few things to think about as you pursue this over the semester. But we have like 10 minutes or so, I think, before we're...
Yeah, we have a little bit more than that.
So I'm happy to take any questions or go over anything, because I know it was really fast.
And by the way...
we spent a lot of time watching Elon Musk GIFs, so we
Yeah,
probably...
and by the way, I will ask you, more likely than not 100% guarantee, but more likely than not, a question from this lecture on the first test. And you might want to speculate, at least out loud, or at least among your friends, what do you think, what kind of question would I ask you from this lecture that you just saw? Remember, it's gonna be posted on campus. He's taken a video of it, he's gonna send it to me. I'm gonna post the whole lecture. But what kind of interesting question could I ask about, from this lecture, that you would be like, ooh, that's a good question you might ask?
And I'm happy to talk about anything.
This is me analyzing their motives as an audience. They're Cornell students, they want to get a good grade. This is like, he's giving me a chance to guess what a question might be. It could help us. Any questions like that? Anybody?
Or comment, anything at all, or something you want to talk about more.
Yeah.
I'm happy with that.
You're very interested in Edmund Burke, right? He's an interesting guy. He taught at a bunch of colleges. Kenneth Burke, yeah, sorry, I was getting Ed Black. But he taught at, I'm actually a member of the Kenneth Burke Society, right? I'm a card-carrying member, I really think he's cool. And he taught at a bunch of schools, like he taught at Columbia, I think, and then he taught at Bennington College.
Bennington mostly.
Yeah, and I think he taught somewhere in the Midwest for a little bit. Yeah.
Once he wrote his books, he became very famous. He went around,
Yeah.
gave lots of
But
visiting instructors, and then after the Red Scare was kind of over.
what college do you think he graduated from? What college do you think Kenneth Burke graduated? So you get wrong. We don't let a piece of trash like that in here. He had no degree. He had no college degree, and he was like this famous college professor.
Yeah.
And he was, the word they used, autodidactic, I don't know if you that term, like self-taught, right? An autodidact. And Steve, why don't you talk a little bit about his house?
Oh yeah, so he lived in New Jersey, almost his whole adult life. And he lived kind of on a farm that didn't really have like running water or any of these conveniences, well water, like a pump. I don't know, he was just kind of lived out in the middle of nowhere. And he was very, very, very good friends almost his whole adult life with another famous New Jersey resident, the poet William Carlos Williams, who you might know. I don't know if you know William Carlos, great American poet, very famous for, not only famous for a lot of important poems in American poetics history, but methods of writing poetry. The variable foot was something he invented. And he was also big in inspiration on other American poets like Allen Ginsberg. So they were really good friends. When Kenneth Burke died, he lived a long life. He died in 1993. His sons decided to preserve his farm exactly the way he left it on the day of his death. And scholars can go in there and look around in the stacks of paper and the files, and people who've gone in there have said they go into these filing cabinets and there'll be a file like labeled something like fish or whatever, and you open it up and there's nothing about, there's all these other clips of things with nothing to do with fish, or whatever's on the folder is not going to be what's in there, but they're trying to figure out his filing system and what it is. And famously they found several drafts of a book that he talks about in his other books, but then he never published full drafts of it, but for some reason he never published it. So Burkeans fight about whether or not they should look at this as part of his work or not, because he'd written a couple of drafts of it, never published it. Maybe he was unhappy with it. Maybe he didn't want it published. Maybe he was still working on it. So should we take the draft and use it, or should we just not use it? And that's what a lot of them fight about today. He was a real interesting character.
But when you go in the house, it just looks like he lived there.
Yeah, it's just stacks of manila folders and clippings from newspapers, things he had typed that he's written on with pen, editing,
His bed.
notes, all kinds of stuff. It's mostly stacks and stacks of papers and books and stuff. It's what you would expect from somebody like that.
That's what I want my house to be. Any questions at all? There must be some questions. There must be some. You want to ask about one of the ancient rhetoricians. You want to ask, what are you thinking about doing for your paper? What might you want to analyze? This is the worst question.
No, it's okay. It's a lot of information, you know. So.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
I mean, like, too much pressure to, like, come up with a good question? I don't get it. You gotta participate if this class is gonna be hard.
Yeah.
I think you and him should debate about,
Truth.
what your different views on, like, what matters. Like, you were talking about how, it matters the intent, and he was saying it doesn't matter the intent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll tell you the differences, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. This is, we have one in captivity. A honest to God postmodernist. He does not believe in capital T truth. He thinks that anything could be the truth, and what you have to do is make arguments as to what's right or wrong, and it changes all the time. There's nothing that's static. Where I, on the other hand, have what are called core values. I'm what's known as a good person, right? And you can trust me. Whereas if somebody walks in here and makes an argument that persuades him, he'll do it, whatever it is, including kill me, right? Am I correct on that?
Maybe.
Yeah, see?
What's in it for me?
Good versus evil, right? That's what the difference is. Postmodernists believe, a modernist like me kind of believes there's a right and there's a wrong. He believes there's multiple rights and wrongs. I believe there's an ideal path to the top of the mountain. He thinks there's many paths to the top of the mountain, and why even go to the mountain? Maybe there's not even a mountain.
Wow.
That's the
Very good.
Yeah.
So if we take a vote, you should vote for your professor because he's going to grade you. But I know
And that would be
secretly,
right.
but secretly I know you can wink or blink twice if you like my position. But I don't know if I'm a postmodernist or not. I don't. In rhetoric, there are many people who are modernists, many people who are postmodernists. I would say modernism is the recognition that the romantic view of the world is a little bit flawed, and that in modernism, we can't quite really understand what makes people tick or why people have the values they do. We're kind of fragmented and distant from each other, and that's something to lament because we'll never quite ever get that. You can think about the ultimate kind of modernist figure, Jay Gatsby, right? Wealthy, having this huge, amazing party, and he's like crying in his library about the light across the, this is like the modernist figure. It's like, I'll never be able to reach, I'll never be able to. This is kind of the modernist figure. So Sam's right, there's these truths and values and things like that. I think postmodernism is like, this is something to celebrate. We should celebrate how fragmented it is and how there's not any kind of possibility for the unification of values or ideas. But we can still have a society, we can still function, we can still have relationships, we can still move on through the world and be productive. In rhetoric, there are postmodernists and modernists. I don't know where I would sit on that, but I would say what's interesting to rhetoricians across the board is not what is true, but how do people account for their understanding of the truth. Right? What is valuable is not as interesting as how do I get other people to understand what should be valuable? What are the moves people are making and how can we understand them? And how do people try to influence each other? And that's what, not in an advertising or PR kind of way, because there is a science of that. Like some of you might be taking a PR class, public relations, or an advertising class, and you study like, great figures like Cialdini, people like that. But that's not the kind of persuasion I'm talking about. It's like, how do I get other people to see the world my way, if only for a few minutes, in order to hopefully condense around some values or some things that I think are good. There's something else I wanted to say about what you said, but I can't remember
said
what it is.
capital T truth. That was one thing I thought, that was like a bait out there for you to take.
Yeah.
Because I wanted you to say, I was hoping that you say, this is my intention, that there is no truth.
Yeah.
And then,
But you see, but there is truth. People fight about it all the time.
yeah, but there's not a static truth. You
No,
believe
no,
in
no.
See, I
Well, I mean, even among people who think there is one, they're always constantly shoring it up and changing it around and adapting it for whatever's coming their way. Right? They're always always kind of like, we get a lot of amusement out of this now. Like we have all these videos on social media where people will go and talk to like Trump supporters and then bait them to say what they think is true, and then immediately try to like make them look foolish or stupid just to see them spin. And everyone's like, ha 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 ha. Right? But this kind of spinning is them defending themselves. They don't see anything funny or weird about it at all. This is normal kind of defense. Anybody would do that in this situation. Yeah?
Can you tell us about some of the research that you do?
My research?
Yeah.
Yeah, so primarily my research has been...
Keep it clean.
Yeah. So primarily my research has been about the history of how people have been taught to debate. I'm very interested in that. So one thing I'm really interested in is around about 1950, a British philosopher named Stephen Toulmin wrote a book called Uses of Argument. And this has been the most influential way to teach people about argument, is the Toulmin model. It's in every single book, every single argument book, everything that you would see. Even books that claim to not be Toulmin based will have the Toulmin model in it. And you can remember it, it's easy to know. If you don't know what it is, Toulmin, his name starts with a T, it's a T. Data warrant claim, right? That's the model that gets taught. Now prior to this has just kind of bleached all debate and argument instruction across the board. It's everywhere, and it's kind of like, you can't get away from it. Prior to Toulmin, you have this huge amount of variety in debate and argumentation textbooks. They all start different ways. So I'm a collector of that stuff. I think it's kind of interesting. Recently I published a piece about the history of American policy debate and the NDT-CETA split. That's coming out like probably in a month or so. I just got that one published. I wrote some stuff about a rhetorical understanding of debate that got published in Italy a year ago. I'm trying to think. I write a lot of stuff, so it's kind of hard to keep track of it. But I'm working now on one of debate tours. There are these debate tours where foreign teams will come to the United States, kind of do a barnstorming tour. The UK, the Irish, different countries will come over and do that. And in 1930, the Germans did one. I have transcripts of their debate from Penn State and from Iowa State. And they come over and they debate things like, Germany should be allowed to rearm. And Germany should not have to pay its Treaty of Versailles war reparations. Whose arguments are these? Oh, historians.
Hitler.
Hitler's arguments. So I saw this and I read the debate, and it's like, Versailles is an illegal treaty. Versailles is against international law. I'm like, are these college kids from the University of Berlin? Who are they? Are they Nazis? Did we really have Nazis arguing on our campuses in the 1930s? Just like, I mean, it's not a modern problem. People are like, oh, go protest that speaker, they're a fascist, right? Not a modern problem. These guys came and they were welcomed with open arms because nobody really knew. One newspaper covers it. They're like the boys from the land of the Hitlerites. This Hitler's just another world leader in 1930. So I'm like, are they Nazis? And yeah. It goes way deeper than that. But I'm kind of looking at their arguments about how they're presenting it and how debate can be a tool for kind of understanding how these things are promoted.
To me, it's interesting because they had these international teams. They pick like the best debaters in colleges and send them to the United States or other countries, or we had American teams we send to other countries. And I was on one of those teams. And I went to the South Pacific, I went to Australia, New Zealand, all these places. And it's interesting, I don't really think of myself as like spreading American propaganda when I'm debating, college students from University of Hong. I was just a college kid, right? But of course I was influenced by growing up in America, and I really didn't like it when they attacked America. Like, it was weird, it made me very patriotic. When they're like, you come from such a screwed up country. And I went, what are you talking about, New Zealand? You're a pimple on our ass, right? You can't do anything.
Very persuasive saying.
Yeah, I know, but you start
That'll
off,
win the Kiwis over.
You start off with a Trump-like insult, and then you explain why they need America. And then they're like, we don't need America. It was an interesting international exchange. I actually learned a lot about it. It changed my whole life, because I was only like in my early 20s when I did it. And now here I am, many decades later, still teaching debate. Many of the ways that I teach debate, Steve would criticize. Like, how many people had my advocacy and debate class? Do you remember the Toulmin model? Yes. Rubbish.
See, that's good. No, it's
Yeah.
good. They remembered it. That's great.
Yeah, well, they remember it, but they're like, that's a bad way to teach. And the reason it's bad, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Steve, but it's because it teaches a very structured way of thinking about argument. And actually, Steve thinks there's a disconnect between making a logical argument and winning a debate. He doesn't think necessarily giving reasons is the way you win a debate.
No, I think I would say there's no audience.
Yeah.
So you have to have audience to teach debate. Most contemporary debate tournaments and debate practice don't have audiences.
Most public speaking teachers, when you teach like a basic class of public speaking, they say, first thing you gotta do is analyze your audience, right? And then they're like, now make your persuasive argument, right? But I think you do that in the Toulmin model. I just think you figure out, you analyze your audience and you, what claim will work, what warrant will work, and what evidence will persuade them, right? And there is, I think, kind of a jaundiced view of how people think that says it doesn't matter what arguments you present them, they've already made up their mind. And that what they're doing is they're rationalizing. Albert Camus said, human beings are not rational animals, they're rationalizing animals. A normal human being would be like, let me look at all the evidence and decide what I should do. But a rationalizing animal would be like, here's where I am, why is that okay?
Yeah, right.
And then just,
But that is the normal human being.
yeah, that's what, I'm not disagreeing with you.
There's an idea.
But I think there's a hope that we're not just using all this research that we produce at universities and facts that we find out and actual truths out there, you know. Do immigration help or hurt America, right? That can actually inform us and make us make good decisions. It's called evidence-based decision-making. But someone like Steve, probably less, I don't want to put words in your mouth, probably less.
Why stop now?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, here's what he would say. Evidence doesn't matter. All that matters is the audience, and they'll believe anything, right? And so what's interesting in studying is the audience, not the actual argument. And I think there's a connection between the argument. I hope there is, between the argument and the decision.
Well, that's the end of the class. Well, I'll say you can't have argument without audience. The Toulmin model is descriptive, not prescriptive. That's my critique of it. You can't teach Toulmin how to make arguments because we do it anyway. That's how you naturally argue with anybody. That's what Toulmin was saying. He's trying to get away from pedantic models that are top-down, showing you how to do it.
You were wrong, you were wrong.
Yeah.
You teach people that when I teach people, first of all, you have to have a point, then you have to have a reason, and then you have to have some evidence. It's like I've introduced them to breathing air. They change the way they argue after they learn how to do that, and they change the way they argue with their friends and family members, right? Because they learn this new thing that they were probably doing, but they didn't know how to analyze it. And also, the great thing about it is when people make arguments that they know are intuitively wrong, they use it to analyze. And they're like, what's wrong with this argument? And they're like, oh, it doesn't have any good evidence. Or the warrant doesn't match the claim, or things like that.
Yeah, yeah. That's what Toulmin says.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Toulmin's God.
But we do it anyway. That's how we default argue.
You think we do it? People understand the Toulmin?
We're doing it now.
I know, because I know the Toulmin model, right? But yes, I didn't always know it, and I became a better arguer and a better persuader once I figured it out. But this is where we disagree, over Toulmin's dead body.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway.
Fight right now.
Right now.
All right, I think that's it for today. Thank you.